Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our guests in the public gallery, and our staff and our councillors and staff at the table. Thank you. We're currently on record. This meeting will be recorded for placement on Council's website for the purposes of broadening knowledge and participation in council issues and demonstrating council's commitment to openness and accountability. All speakers must ensure their comments are relevant to the issue at hand and to refrain from making personal comments or criticisms or mentioning any private information. No other persons are permitted to record the meeting unless specifically authorised by council to do so. I would just ask that everyone ensures that their mobile phones are turned to silent or off. So our opening prayer. We give thanks for the contribution by our pioneers, early settlers, and those who fought on the various wars for the fabric of the Tenterfield community we have today. May the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord. Lord God Almighty. Amen. Acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land that we are meeting on today. I'd also like to pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging of the Juckabal, Kamilaroi and Bundjalung nations and extend that respect to other Aboriginal people present. Do we have any, with no councillor apologies, any disclosures and declarations of interest? Councillor Sawyer.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Unfortunately, we haven't got a form available. I'm declaring an interest in item CON5/22. I'm the chairman of Tenterfield National Monument Association. I have no financial return element. I'll abstain in the room and I will be voting.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sawyer. So noted, and we'll find the form and get that filled out. Confirmation of the previous minutes. So if we move to page 9. Require a mover and a seconder, please. Mover for the minutes, please. Councillor McNish, a seconder for Councillor Rhodes. The recommend
So the recommendation is that the minutes of the following meeting of Tenterfield Shire Council, Ordinary Council meeting 27th of April 2022, as typed and circulated, be confirmed and signed as a true record of the proceedings of these meetings.
Any alterations or amendments? All in favour? Carried. Any tabling documents? Urgent, late and supplementary items of business. 0, thank you. We have no community consultation application and no mayoral minute. Now, recommendations for items to be considered in confidential section. We have items there. If I may have a mover and seconder, those be Councillor Sawyer and Councillor Reddy. All in favour? Now we move to page 17, which is our open council reports. COM 5/22. This is reallocate grant funding to our community's program extension streetscape project. If I may have a mover and seconder for this, please. Moved by Councillor Kim, seconded by Councillor McNish. And it offers to recommendation, Kylie.
No problem, thank you, Madam Chair. Jodie is in the room, so the author of the report to take us through that one, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so the purpose of this report today is to advise Council that the Tenterfield National Monument Association has requested to amend the project scope in accordance with Resolution 9920 and to reallocate the remaining funds of the original 100,000 that was to go to the post office for heritage painting to another building within the CBD. If this is approved, there will be no change of deed needed through the funding body.
Thank you very much, Jodie. I'll just, before we start any discussion, as head of the Monuments Association, if I could just ask councillor Sawyer to give us an update first, and then we will go into discussions. This does not count as councillor Sawyer speaking for recommendation.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Originally, when we were allocated 700,000 back in February, March, I think it was 2 years ago, our committee and project team identified 7 sites out of the original 20-something owners that expressed interest in participating. The Tenterfield Star is well underway. Unfortunately, we've struck a snag there with Red Timber that if they try and plane it to use as a signboard, it'll split. And the builder said he's not prepared to put his reputation on the line delivering a shoddy job. So that's been delayed, but what's already been completed on the facade looks very, very good compared to what was there before. The Premier store currently being held up, the awning currently being held up by Acro Props, is being done by BJS Constructions, and they're due to start anytime soon. And that will possibly be completed before the timber is dried for the Tenterfield Star. BJS is also given the job of doing the Steve Orford building, otherwise known as the National Building. That there, and again, both of those should be more than likely completed because they're a different type of structures compared to what our affinity for the components going to do on the start. We've got Sing Sing scoped, but unfortunately our funds aren't going to be enough to do Sing Sing. The Federation Bakery up near the service station there in High Street has also been scoped. And I can advise the media and the audience this morning that if we are successful in having this application to move the funds across from what was not our project originally, it was a separate $100,000 grant that we were asked to look after because it wasn't in our original 700. We scoped it out and discovered that it was going to be way over the 100,000 figure, and we had decided as a committee we would transfer some of our funds that we weren't able to do the other buildings with in to get that post office done. Unfortunately, our extra money would not go anywhere near what the actual cost of getting that post office brought up to date, because it looks wonderful from the other side of the road. But when our architects and engineers got up and had a look at the windows, there's 65 windows before they stop counting that require repair before they can even have a smidgen of paint put on them. Scaffolding was going to be $90,000 on its own, according to the quote that we got. So we decided that we were not able to properly do that job, but it is now shovel ready if there are any future grants, and Sing Sing is also shovel ready for any future grants. The money that we're asking to be transferred over to the Riviera site at the Federation Bakery site, with our available funds left after completing those other 3 projects that are near underway or are underway, will be completed. So those tin hoardings will come down and you'll see what it looked like in the golden days. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I'll just confirm what councillor Sawyer said, 25th February 2020, the 700,000 went to the Monuments Project because as a council we thought that to and particularly with the bypass looming as well, that restoring the heritage fabric of the street would encourage people to stop and stay or would be coming in the first place. And the 100,000 was a transfer of monies that went to another project which wasn't able to be done at the time. I would note to people that funding had already was also given to paint the lower story of the post office to repair, to cosmetically fix the worst of the paint that we could do. So, questions?
Yeah, just clarity. On page 18, the 3-year Metamed to Joe. With on page 18 with the last 2 paragraphs there, that's purely clarity, and obviously with the approval of this money to go over into that fund. So what was done through council was asked for an extension of this program to go out to the 20th of May 2023. So that's with this other money, that's a whole.
Yeah, so the whole, all the projects that you see in the table up the
Yep,
top, that's
yep.
all the extension of all those.
Well, thank you, and I do need to just note to and commend Councillor Sawyer and the job he's been doing as chairperson on that matter. That hasn't been easy, councillor, and to see that work start on the Star office, obviously has been good, but we will see it all completed, and I do wish you well. It's not easy working with tradies, and so we do have to see it. Thank you, Madam.
Any other councillors?
Thank you, Mrs. Mayor.
Got a hold.
It's being held down, it's not working.
Use your outside voice.
Quick question to Jody. Now, the post office job was basically a repaint job and it looks really, really good. How can you justify $14,959 in consultancy and signage costs?
I'll take that on board. That's the information that we've been provided by the management team, councillor, that they've expended in having those works undertaken. So as I said, that's what we've been requested, has been spent as part of the grant today.
What do you need a consultant to do in your paintability?
The grant, just to be clear, council is not responsible for the project. So the project decision making and management has been outsourced to the Tenterfield Monument Association. So that's a question I can't answer. That group makes the decisions in the best interest of having those projects completed, and we equip the funds that are provided for us from that particular group. Now, there is also, with all of these projects, a need to have qualified people who undertake a lot of the assessment, so that's not necessarily something that we can do either if we were undertaking that project.
However, we could ask that question of the monument group to come back to us with information regarding that aspect.
What might ask Councillor Sawyer now, is there any reason?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, as Kylie has said, we have to have qualified people to do the assessment on the building. Whilst it was a paint job, if we'd have just gone in and painted over the top, the windows would have fallen apart before the paint even looked like drawing. Those windows are in a deplorable state, and we would have wasted the painting if we'd have gone ahead and painted the building as is. There is a scope ready to go, as I said earlier in my report on progress. That costing is ready to go. If we get any future grants that post office fits in, it will be first cab off the rank. Sing Sing will be second, because we have scoped them out and we know what they're going to cost, provided the steel and the timber costs do not go up much more than they already have. That money hasn't been wasted. It is there in a report, and it belongs to the post office project. And if for some reason the Monument Association is not involved when they get their grant money, we will hand over all that information that's been gathered from those experts that we've had to pay for the information.
I'm not questioning, I'm just wondering, that's all. It just seems anything to do with council, it just blows out.
Councillor Jeff.
Just a bit more on Peter Petty, Councillor Petty's question. The extension of the grant time, is it likely that would be approved, or what happens if it wasn't, or is it unlikely it won't be approved?
No, so I've been told that through the funding body that they'll put it in for assessment. Can't make a decision yet until the caretaker mode has been finalised. But yeah, they've put a recommendation for it to be approved. I don't think we'd be successful in getting any extra extension of time.
Just some further information to that, because we had that time frame looming, I was contacting Barnaby's office, Barnaby Joyce's office every second day about this project, because it was hugely vital to town, and it was 80% of our drought funding and our drought grant. So we are not the only council in that position. There were quite a few others, and that helped us get it across the line, that they did put in an ability to have the extension granted, because they knew how important these projects were. So so that's where we're at. So fortunately, there were many councils in the same position, as in, even though this is a project being handled by an outside body, it still came under council's distribution and overall coverage. So the other thing, Councillor Sawyer, questions have been asked about why not paint the wooden bit at the northern end, which looks pretty tacky. Would you please respond?
Thanks, Madam Mayor. During that scoping exercise, it was determined that ugly building on the side there, the timber part, is not actually part of the Heritage Original Post Office, and it was an add-on. And under our scoping of the project, we would not keep that section. It would be removed and paint the building back to the way it was originally. That section there's an add-on, and it doesn't meet our scope. If someone else takes the project on next time, they're free to make their own choices, but there was no monetary value in even bothering to paint that. It was just going to blow the project out further. And we didn't have the funds to go with it, and hence this application.
Councillor Jones.
Councillor Sawyer, well, as councillor, not as member of the national, can you hear me?
It's not working either.
Oh, mine's not working either. Okay, correct me if I'm wrong, but the funding targets projects that the projects that we were supposed to spend the drought money. I have asked for a copy of the grant so I could look through it, because I was worried the other day when I looked through what projects could be targeted. One of them was to provide work for people whose employment has been impacted by drought. 2, stimulate local community spending. 3, use local resources, businesses and suppliers, which, as you said, you're using. Provide a long-lasting benefit to communities and the agricultural industries they depend on. How does the post office or any of these other buildings fit into what we receive the money for? Could you expand on that, please?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm confused whether you want me to answer as the chairman of the Monument Association or as a councillor.
As a councillor, assuming you're on both.
Right. As a councillor, I voted along with all the other councillors that this project met the criteria. So 10 councillors voted and 10 councillors said this particular project met the criteria. We have used local builders. We have used one local architect, one former Tenterfield citizen as the other part of the architectural team. We have tried to resource as many materials as we can locally, but we haven't been completely successful. But I would say the overwhelming majority of the expenditure will be local. As the Mayor said, this project is designed to stimulate future economic advancement in the town with the threat of the bypass coming through. We need attractions to bring people in and stay a while rather than drive past or stop for a coffee and keep going.
Okay.
If I could just add further clarification, Councillor Secon, the original proposal was for 900,000 to go to the main streets redevelopment, and we made amendments on that day. It was a meeting up at Legume.
Yeah, in June.
It was Legume.
Yep.
Wasn't it?
Remember it well.
Yes, and the post office actually wasn't part of the original agreement. It was $100,000 to go towards the Northern Border Walk. We also had other things that we'd suggested in there, including water for farmers, et cetera, and we'd also discussed having contractors go out and clean out dams while they were empty, et cetera. And we had advice back from the government department overseeing it that none of these worthy projects that we all thought were pretty on the money for drought-affected farmers, that none of them, in their opinion, actually met the criteria. So we had to change some of the projects. So anyway, so the Northern Border Walk was one that was in there, and we, some months later, 6 months later, our then Economic Development Officer came to us and said that there were issues there with national parks and with where placements of toilets, etc., would go. And so at that stage, we wouldn't have met the time frame, which is why we then made a decision of putting the money to the post office, because meantime, they'd started on the post office painting, and clearly the funding we provided for that wasn't enough to do the whole building. So that's just a little bit more background. Nan, you've got a supplementary question.
Yes, I do, because on the grant, because I wouldn't have a look at the grant, 5.2 of eligible activities, it has repairs and maintenance, upgrading or building new community facilities. I don't see any of the buildings which are privately owned come under that. Repairs, maintenance, upgrades, construction and fit out of community spaces. I can't see anything of the monument project with that. Employing local contractors and here to undertake repairs and maintenance. I completely understand that. We could have spent the money also on holding more events. We could have spent the 700,000 undertaking other drought relief activities, including water carting for human consumption that benefit the community. And we could have used that money for adverse
Point of order.
event
Councillor McNeish.
plan.
The councillor's, she's way off what we're talking about.
Councillor Secon, the decision was made at the time, but that water cartage was one of the things we had asked about, and despite it being written there, we were knocked back on that. So that was one, I think we had $50,000 for water cartage, and that was refused in the discussions prior to, which we were somewhat gobsmacked by, and you'll actually find it in the documents of the day about the water cartage, because we'd actually put in more than $1 million worth of projects in case they cross something off, we have something else, and water cartage was one of those. So this is what it is, and it met the criteria and it was approved. And the question we're dealing with today is, do we insist that the money go towards painting some of the post office, or do we put it into the timber buildings, commonly called the Revera buildings, up in High Street, so that when people come into town, they actually see the start of, I think Robert Perry actually described them as probably the most important buildings because they were in the CBD, the oldest original buildings.
Madam Mayor, if I may, I move that we put the officer's recommendation and fully support councillor McNeish.
A seconder, councillor Tim. So the recommendation is put. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? With that noted, councillor.
Yes,
Scott?
please.
Yes,
I'm
please
going
note that councillor Scott- So this is a division.
Yeah.
And
Can
then
I
so,
also give my reason for it?
hands up first, please. So we've only got councillors, because we're carrying a division, go around. Are you recording against, or is it a division?
Just a point of clarity,
I'm
Madam Mayor,
against.
through you. Well, we call it a division because if it's a division, it must be seconded.
That's what I'm asking the question,
Well,
because we've got, because we
Thank you,
had,
Colin.
yeah, because we had a mover and a seconded, did we not, with councillor
That we put
Secon
the
and councillor
officer's
McNish,
recommendation.
to consider the report?
No. For the divisions, councillor Secon and councillor McNish, but the original movers and seconders were
No, sorry.
councillor Kim and councillor John
I'm against the,
on the division.
councillor Secon was.
So it's only councillor Secon's report.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. Just checking, because, yeah, we're good. Sorry.
We're good to go?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. So the motion is carried, and we look forward to having the completion of all these buildings ASAP.
Here.
Okay, page 22. Item ECO 7/22, return grant funds relating to proposed Salio's front wash, Transport New South Wales grant funding. A mover and seconder.
Happy to move, Madam Chair, with Madam Mayor, with a couple of questions.
Thank you, seconder. Councillor Tim. Officers report, please. questions today. Jody?
Okay, so the purpose of this report is to advise council of the recommendation from the Sale Arts Committee to not proceed with the truck wash and return all of the grant funding to the Transport New South Wales through fixing country truck washes.
Any questions, councillor Peter?
Thanks for the opportunity, Madam Mayor. Before I do it, and I'll purely get through you to Jody for a bit of clarity, just on page 26, so you can prepare yourself, Jody, under financial 3. What I do want to do before I ask those questions, Madam Mayor, is thank the CEO, to you, Darryl, for the meeting you had with the agents out there. Good on you, mate. That's all about local stuff, and you showed your work that day with meeting with those fellas. Didn't have to be a big drawn out thing, and got their opinion, and all that does is foster relationships with that most important facility we provide this community, and I commend you on that for that day. Thank you. So on page 26, once again, the recruitment, it's purely clarity. Now, we got the funding through the state and federal government, 600K. Now we spent, this tells me council's come expended 60,000 for the design and truck wash, correct?
Yes.
So, but then we get down paragraph underneath that, then the returning these funds to funding body, 190 grand, $609.28, subject to negotiation. What's that on? The way I thought it'd be that the 60,064 dollars and 64 cents comes off the 600,000. No, it's purely clarity, Joe. That's all.
We'd have to go into negotiations with the funding body
Right.
as to whether or not we have to return all money that we've collected
Right.
or been given.
Yeah.
Or they'll allow us to keep the 60, which we believe that we'll have to return it all.
Right. So what's the 190,609? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's the first instalment payment for the
Right.
project.
Okay. Right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody.
And purely with the
Didn't quite
question-
add- Didn't quite add up
Yeah.
to that section.
With the question, Madam Mayor, what this council has a good record on is spending grant money in where it's been allocated. So it is concern of mine that the reputation of this council with the state and federal government that we can do the job. Sadly, we've stepped away from this one for obvious reasons, and I fully support that decision at this stage. But it's all about relationships with our federal and state government and our members also. That in future that when we give grant allocation to do X, that we can do the job, and we always have. But this one just got a bit too tough for us.
That's good. So a combination of the drought and the extreme cost and our current financial position, it's deemed prudent that we don't proceed. And because of the costs that we have had quoted, it would make it a very expensive facility to actually run. And then the obvious question is, would you even get any customers? Even though the truck wash is extremely important to meet biosecurity standards. Councillor Jeff.
Thanks, Mayor. Through the Mayor, Jody, with regards to, just clarification mainly, but with regards to the budgetary issues of the budget and also depreciation cancellation, is that pending, one, the passing of this motion, and two, negotiation with the Treasury finalisation to remove those items from the budget?
Through you, Madam Mayor, so none of this is a work in progress as yet, so no depreciation, etc., is in council's accounts for a new asset at this point in time. The question will arise in the negotiation of handing the funds back as to whether or not we can make that claim for the funds that we've already expended, or whether or not we need to adjust the budget to return the full amount to the funding authority that they provided in the first instance.
Yeah, sorry, just for clarity, the only reason for the question was that obviously there is a budget sitting out there that eventually, if it's all done, would disappear off the project scheme. And two, the report clarifies that depreciation won't be. So I understand what you're saying there. Depreciation hasn't gone in yet, but so now that's saved us depreciation. Yep.
And I'll just also add for people's information, top of page 26, the double height loading ramp, which has nothing to do with the grant, that is going to continue, and that is funded by the levy that the cattle producers pay on every lease that goes through. And with recent sales, we should be even Stevens with that one. Any further questions? Put the motion, Cobb's recommendation. All in favour? Against? Councillor Gianna, against? That was it.
Yes, please, and I'd like to say why.
I think you should, if you're going to, can you please ask a question or make a comment before we actually go to the vote? But I'll allow this one time, thank you.
Okay,
Councillor
then.
Gianna.
So under section 439 of the LGA, I have to act honestly and exercise a reasonable degree of care and diligence by properly examining and considering all the information provided to me relating to matters that I am required to make a decision on. And it is because of that that I've looked into it, and I don't think I have enough information to make the correct decision as to handing back the matter. That's all.
Thanks, Councillor Gianna, but in a nutshell, it's we had to co-fund it with $600,000 and we are not in a financial position to do that. And so to the disappointment of the cattle producers and the sale-outs, we've made that hard decision to not go ahead because it would then cost the ratepayers another $600,000. And plus ongoing depreciation, et cetera, and operating expenditure. Thank you very much. Page 31, item ENB 7/22. Yeah, we actually did, and then Gianna wanted to explain why she voted against, and I allowed her to do so as an exception. But I just ask everyone if you have any comments or any concerns, please make those comments prior to our vote. Item ENB 7/22, draft village concept plans. A mover, please.
Happy to move, Madam Chair, once again, and with a question, please, if I could.
Thank you. And the second, Councillor Knight.
With the question.
With a question as well. Very good.
Copycat.
So the officers, we have welcome Tremaine, our planner, Tremaine Davidson to the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to present to Council the draft concept plans for the villages of Liston, Legume, Urbanville, Drake, Torrington, Mcmillan and Jennings, and seek a resolution to adopt the plans. These plans build on research and community consultation undertaken by Council and the village communities for over 2 years. The plans will provide a blueprint for future village improvements and a focus for improving the functioning and aesthetics of the village as funds and resources become available.
Any questions regarding the draft concept plans? I see there's been some changes made in them. Councillor Peter and then Councillor Jeff.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. And to you, through you, Madam Mayor, to Tremaine, it's purely it's not a criticism, but I was just wondering, especially with the concept plan to Liston, if this is the document that's going to be out there, and I think the documents are really good, Mayor, I really do. Just a shame we couldn't have a photo, and I'm being petty, a photo of the Cobb and Co shed in that, because the area in this side is very proud of that, and that community done an outstanding job to raise those funds with much help from the council and both federal and state members. And just another comment, I was pleased to see that because it is a long-term plan of theirs with Legume, with number 7 on the Legume concept plans. I mentioned that the proposed log skidder display, that they're very keen on getting that done. A long way of getting there, but those things need to be down in the document, and so we can head, as Councillor Bonner and I do, attend those wonderful meetings up there and help that community get there somehow, some way, with funding to get that done.
Can those adjustments be made?
Yes, do you, Madam Mayor? We can certainly add a photograph as the coach.
I didn't, it'd be good for it to be in there.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. And the documents aren't static, so these will be reviewed over time. It's not completed in line with funding that we receive. So we can review these plans. They're not sitting in stone.
Yes. As Peter said, given that log skidder of a similar nature to the coach is something we've even considered for our grant applications.
if I can just speak to that, Madam Mayor, what, and not going to sit here today and be derogative of the Lagoon progress or not. Councillor Bott and I have advised that organisation, they're quite entitled as an organisation, as a progress association, as Liston did. And I'll stand correct, I think Liston might have got $20,000 themselves through our federal member, but they applied for that. It wasn't through this council that progress association got that money. To their credit, we helped with bits and pieces. I know we did, council, but the Lagoon can go down the same path and contact both their state and federal members. And there's bits and pieces we all know funding around at different times where they might be lucky enough to gain some funding for that.
And it wasn't hugely expensive. Just sorry, my apologies to my basically one where it talks about the long skidder display that says location yet to be decided. I think at the community consultations, we actually, the owner was there and I believe it was to be on the southern side of the driveway into the hall was the ideal place. So whether you need to update that or not, the owner perhaps kick off.
It's a suggestion.
Okay, right. Councillor Knight next, and then Councillor McNish, Councillor Peters to follow.
This is purely a confirmation through the mayor, but in the report, it actually says no budgetary implications. So this is more just a verbal confirmation just for the meeting that there definitely in adoption of this proposal that there is no budgetary burden at this stage from that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. There's no budgetary obligations or commitment by council for any of the projects. It's purely a strategic viewpoint that the communities and council have resolved on.
And it assists us when we go to decide on allocation of or disbursement of grants. For instance, Urbanville has got their youth facilities, but they don't want to have another playground because they have new ones. They've made it very clear that they're looking for other things. So, Councillor John.
I just, thanks, Mrs. Mayor. Page 50 on the Drake.
Speak up, councillor.
That's not working.
Mine works, your mine.
No, mine's not.
Yours off going on now.
It'll go red. You speak.
No, it's not going.
Okay.
Just a typo on the first paragraph on page 50, plus an incomplete sentence. The tagging is an official document and there are mistakes there.
I'll teach us how to know.
The teachers have.
Yeah, within
Within the drain.
and village.
Yeah. Might be a little bit pedantic, but
I'm going to take one. Councillor Tom. Yes, thanks, Councillor Peters.
Page 57. The proposed plan beginning. It's obviously a very, very old picture of the railway bridge. As you well know, and everyone else knows, it's just about ready to fall in the creek. So it's not a good look for the town coming into Caterpillar along the highway and finding the bridge just about ready to collapse. And, something needs to be done about it.
That's not the technical bridge.
That's black.
Yeah, that's Black River Bridge.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we can change the vote.
But if I can speak, Madam Mayor, Councillor Peters 100% right, and this council, previous council, we've had many times, and I think even Councillor Sawyer, when were notified at the end of the term of the last council, beginning of this one, I can't remember Councillor Peters, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, that we were advised that the John Holland Group will no longer be in control or maintenance of the railway corridor from Armidale to the border. And I can't think of the name of the. Sorry?
UGL,
Yeah, we
and
were
I
the
think we contacted them, I'm not sure we've heard that.
And we will go, I don't know if you were in the meeting, Councillor Peters, but we have done everything this council can do to pursue them. I'm as passionate as anything, Tom, about it, because it's on the highway and there's not a day goes past where if you're driving that way, someone's not photographing or sketching it, that bridge, and it is going to fall into the creek. So we have done everything we can in the power of council, local government area to contact that new group. But obviously, as the mayor said, it's no.
And at the March country mayor's meeting, I raised the issue with the Transport Minister because he was having his first meeting with UGL that day about the state of the railway line as far as weeds go and the state of the bridges,
Good.
heritage bridges.
Thank you,
and
Madam.
the safety issue, not only visual dreadful thing that collapses, but also the safety issue downstream to animals, people, vehicles, etc. Councillor.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I would like to ask, it's not working.
Yes, it is.
Oh, it's working. I'd like to ask whether Bruce Mills could bring us up to date on his follow-up on the restoration of that bridge.
Sure that we can take that on notice to include in the monthly operational report. This particular report or item that we're dealing with is the adoption of the plans at this point in time.
So that will
we
be
can take that on notice.
that will be the first question in the next item of business. Thanks, Councillor.
Thank you.
Any further questions on the village plans? Councillor Gianna.
Going to page 109, which is the Mingula one, we have down that in the locality visitors can enjoy hiking, mountain bike cycling, four-wheel drive trails, water views at national parks. Where are they? And relics and abandoned mines from 1870s mining boom. I've never been to or seen any of that. And then there's also reference to the wineries. I think we should look into seeing if those wineries are still working and will be working in the next years.
Is that the lines are still continuing? The Mingula people have just issued a bird walking brochure. Certainly my understanding that people were still looking at to me, the old tobacco bars, etc., but also some of the old mines down there. May might have some more information, Councillor Kim.
Through you, Madam Mayor. The week before last, I was working on an Indigenous grant program, and there's quite a number of Indigenous artefacts down in that area, and so obviously that would fit into that criteria as well.
The birthing tree, which I completely agree with.
Further questions? All in favour? Thank you. Monthly operational report is the next item of business. Page 139. Item GOB 41/22. Monthly operational report April 2022. A mover, please. Councillor John Nish, seconder. Councillor, Peter, seconder. Councillor King, thank you. Councillor Kim Rose. And Darryl.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Pretty self-explanatory. The recommendations council received notes the status of the monthly operation report for April 2022. As council is aware, this is a relatively new document and it is evolving as we progress, but I'm happy to take any questions.
First question, Councillor Murphy and then Councillor Nish. Yes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd just like to show where I put highlights on this report to indicate my concerns with it. All the pink ones.
Thank you. Any questions?
Yes. Yep. Starting with page 146. I note that there's a moratorium on applying for co-funded grants because we don't have the funds available to co-fund. I have recently made a very detailed submission on how those co-funding co-funds could be realised and how that would impact our securing co-funded grants. For every $1 million, we can secure co-funded grants between $2 million and $4 million. In other words, either double or quadruple our money. So my question through you, Madam Mayor, to the Chief Executive is why are we not doing that?
Thank you, Darryl.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor, the moratorium is based on today's situation. As we stand today, we do not have any unrestricted funds to contribute to co-contributions. In terms of your suggestions in raising capital, they are all valid suggestions, and that will form part of the ongoing SRV process and how we manage our long-term financial plan. And that may include, again, it's up to council, that may include selling assets. And then, as you're aware, we have given you a list of assets that we could possibly sell to raise capital, but that's a body of work that council will have to do ongoing. It's not something you can do as a knee-jerk reaction, because there is, I guess, fallout from certain activities, and the council needs to be fully aware of what those fallouts will be. But certainly it's on the table, councillor.
Taking your next one, please.
I'd like to continue to speak to that. I'm sorry, I don't find that acceptable. We are facing very serious financial challenges. And as you know, the very recommendation you made was to consider selling and leasing back 3 executive homes, which would realise net proceeds of more than $1 million. And I cannot see why we should be waiting to proceed with an initiative like that, particularly when we're talking about a multi-million-dollar deficit budget and borrowing $3.1 million for infrastructure projects. If we pursue that particular option, which you yourself recommended, we could find enough co-funded grants not to have to borrow $3.1 million for infrastructure projects.
Through the mayor, let me just qualify that. That certainly wasn't my recommendation. It was an options paper that I gave council that is something for consideration. I was very clear in that document. It was not a recommendation because I had not done the background work that I believe is required to make sure we don't make bad decisions. And council needs to have as much information and background information as I can provide them so they can make an informed decision. And furthermore, councillor, that discussion is between you and your fellow councillors. And that is part, I guess, of the workshops that we plan to have going forward. You as the elected body will, with our information provided, will make those informed decisions and direct me to do whatever action council decides.
Let's agree to disagree. Moving on, the same paragraph, you refer to the council being successful in securing a large grant, but you're not telling us how much that grant is. Surely that's relevant to the budget considerations.
It was $487,000. This is for the park. I presume is that?
Yeah, it is. It's not in the public realm yet. That was
It is now. Sorry. Yeah, so this was additional, a separate grant to the youth precinct legacy grant that we got. So
through the mayor, there's a moratorium on that. It actually hasn't been publicly announced yet. It's only information that we've received through backdoor channels. Fiona, did you have anything to add to that?
sorry.
Nothing to add, probably.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we've received some streets and shared spaces funding to contribute towards the youth precinct. I'd need to look into the latest on that grant.
Well, actually, Janelle Stafford made it public last week, which is why I did actually mention it on the radio interview last Friday, where she congratulated us, and I will find it exactly, but it was, I believe, $487,000. So very welcome, because that will help assist making that a very inviting space for not just our youth, but also other users and other locals of all ages and visitors to our lovely town.
And can I please make comments just on the fact that we applied for that grant? That expression of interest was submitted back in November of 2021, so it took a while to come through.
Thank you. Now we'll give another councillor a go here. Who's next on the list? Was it?
Sorry.
Sorry, John.
Oh,
Jeff or John, one of you, I had.
Through the mayor, yeah, I would like to to thank the CEO for the work you've done to date in highlighting efficiencies and development efficiencies and acknowledge the fact that we all realise this is an ongoing process. And just seeking some clarification on the library grant, that it is a cost neutral grant.
Through the Mayor, Councillor, that is correct, and I believe the typo wasn't. I did fix the typo. I thought I'd actually given you the wrong number, but that's correct. That's a cost neutral grant.
Thanks, Councillor Jeff. Just to Councillor Murphy, Janelle Sappin on the 19th of May last week. Tenterfield Lands, $480,375 for linking people and place from that Streets of Shared Spaces program round 2. And that Ms. Sappin said she'd actively promoted Streets of Shared Spaces and was delighted Tenterfield Shire would receive $487,375 in funding for this linking people and place project in Crown Street. And says the project will focus on linking and diversifying the uses for Jubilee Park and the youth precinct by creating a crossing point for pedestrian and cyclists, installing a pop-up container cafe, solar lighting to promote the use of the area in the evening and at night, and introducing public Wi-Fi. Thank you.
Through the Mayor, I just may qualify. So when we're talking about the moratorium on grants, all we're talking about are grants that aren't cost neutral, because as we stand today, until council resolves on what it wants to do in terms of an SRB and also raising capital through the sale of assets potentially, until those discussions and those resolutions are taken, we just do not have the funds to apply for those grants. Having said that, the caveat on that is it doesn't mean we are sitting there not applying for grants. There are other grants available. And I guess what I'm trying to suggest here, we are being successful in acquiring those grants that are cost neutral. And when I say cost neutral, that's not necessarily true either. There still is a lot of staff time required, not only to apply for the grants, but to administrate the grants. And that is a real cost to council in time and money. So I would ask council just to keep that top of mind. So my language is that it's cost neutral, but there is staff time required and ongoing staff time to manage and report on that funding. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Fish, did you have a question?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, sorry. Page 161. The volume of 161 at the visitor information stuff. Very disturbing to find out that the centre is not open 7 days a week, particularly on weekends. Just got to do something to get more volunteers. Now, I've spoken to the mayor about this, and she's in agreement. Some years ago, under the instigation of former Mayor Keith Pixton, we had a volunteers expo. Some of you may remember that. Now, I was very apprehensive of how this might work. It turned out to be an absolutely fabulous day where every organisation in the Shire who had volunteers had a stall. As well as that, there was music, there was a band, like a local band, which no longer is in existence, unfortunately, called Random Harvest, I remember. Random Selection. They were singing, there was ropey at a barbecue and so on. We filled up the whole Memorial Hall, plus the lane outside. So I talked to the mayor about the possibility of doing this again. It was really successful because a lot of people said to me, gee, I didn't know there was such and such an organisation here. And a lot of organisations picked up a lot of volunteers on that day. So that may be a way to not help the business centre, but to help every other organisation in town which relies on volunteers. You'd be surprised how many there are. So it's been thought, the mayor and I have spoken about it, and we are trying as soon as we can to get the plans in action to do this again.
And Councillor Mish, for your information, the emergency services meeting, they were very keen on the idea as well. And just before we move, I think Councillor Kim, did you have any comment to make on the volunteers?
Expo. I'm certainly in favour of it. I don't think council is in a position to be perhaps running and organising the event. I think it would be helpful to us to talk to other organisations from within the town to see whether they would join forces and get the event organised. And I would also like to point out that there is some grant money available at the moment to run such events in our community that is not co-funded. And certainly we should be looking into securing a little bit of that funding for the spring summer program that's currently happening.
Thanks very much. Next.
Page 171. Up at the top, it's got the library. Collection management is in progress to delete 5,000 odd items from the collection. I'd just like to ask, is there any plans put to sell the books that are being culled, or that's going to go into a dumpster at the back?
Through the mayor, certainly they won't go to a dumpster. I think we fought a war on protection of literacy and books at some stage in the past, so we certainly don't want to reignite those sorts of tensions. Look, we are looking at options. There was one option say that they may be partially, some of them could be donated down to Lismore because they lost all their collection in the floods. But since then, there's been further discussions about perhaps selling them locally and raising some funds, and I'll be happy to have that discussion further with council through the mayor as we get closer to the point. But I can promise you we will not be putting them in the dumpster because I'm an advocate of old-fashioned books.
And also our halls have a lot have lending libraries, so we will need to decide what happens with those books. First, I think if we can sell what we can to recover monies, and anything that's left over be dispersed to our community halls or schools, etc. Yeah, thank you.
Two to go, Mrs. Mayor. Page 180. This won't take long. About the Westpac helicopter rescue helicopter. I was interested to say that they've advised that the fine helicopter landing pad at Drake is not warranted. I'd like to dispute that. I had a call from a chap last week is on the Progress Association down there. There was a need for the helicopter. It couldn't land if the ground was too wet. The ambulance they finally found somewhere, the ambulance got bogged going to it. And it could be potentially very, very serious. So I think there is definitely a need for a helicopter landing pad in Drake. I think we must keep pursuing that.
And you'll be pleased to note it's even noted in the village concept plans that we have just passed. Also, for people's information, the Progress Association has some funds to put towards that pad, and the hold-up that they've had when they went to do it some years ago was a native title claim over the cricket business a few months ago being lifted.
Okay.
Your final one, Councillor?
Page 215, Mrs. Mayor. I was very disturbed when I read this. So, we're all talking and worried about our budgetary constraints. Preschool and kindergarten leased land from council. No invoices were sent or no rent paid for approximately 8 years. An invoice for back rent had been sent to the tenant in late 2021. The tenant has requested that past rent be waived due to financial constraints. How could that happen, Ms. Cole?
Once again, council, we're continually going through and trying to update our property portfolio. Remember some years ago, we actually had the first property officer employed. Like everything, we triage the highest value items first, and we're continually going through and making sure that we are sending the appropriate accounts. The quantum of that level is preparing a report to come to council. So once again, as I said, if we're continuing to modify our processes, the idea is obviously to tidy up all of these things that have been outstanding for considerable years based on the resourcing that was available at that time. The quantum, I believe it's under $4,500, so we're not talking millions of dollars, but still $4,500 that we're looking at trying to recover, but council will make a decision about that when the report's provided.
If I could just add that my understanding and my deliberations with the preschool kindergarten, it's not that they don't wish to pay. What they're questioning is that the land that they lease from the Crown Lands which is where the building and the main infrastructure is at a certain price per square metre. When the fence went up, there's a little strip that goes inside that fence that is part of the land that council administers. So the price that council charges for that little strip of land is a much higher price per square metre than that paid by the same organisation to Crown Lands, who actually owns the whole block. And what they're asking is that we reevaluate our rental to the same rate they pay to Crown Lands for the same land, so it's consistent price per square metre. That's what they're really asking, not that they don't want to pay, but that they just think there's an inequity there in the pricing per square metre. So my question would be, can we get the boundary changed so it's not even on council's books at all to put a bill out every year or every 10 years? And therefore it's all done under Crown Lands, or does that require something different? If we can deal with that when Neville brings a report to us.
And that will be subject to the report, Madam Mayor. There are other things too, and as I said, I'm happy to be open about this. We've been doing an awful lot of work trying to organise a lot of our broadcast licences and the like, and just through the resourcing and staff levels, we haven't been able to get there. So as soon as we can get to these items and triage them, they're certainly on the list to be completed.
Thank you, Councillor Chair.
Sorry, just one more question on the operational plan. It's important to me because it's bottom line budget type item. Just acknowledging that the submission for the reclassification of the Bruxner Highway appears to have been lodged, and I did read that there's no definitive timeline. No best guesses at all?
Yes, I do have a best guess for you. In March, at the same meeting, I was talking about the roads, the Transport Minister, he was heading off that day to meet with Wendy Machin, who's the chair of the independent panel, who's looking at all the assessments of these roads to be handed back as per the election promise, 15,000 roads and kilometres of roads, which so far they've only done 460 kilometres. And he said that he should be receiving a report in July. But it would be a couple of months after that before, even potentially as far out as November, till any decisions were announced. So yeah, so it would be this year for the next step, not necessarily, you know, it could be another 400 kilometres, it might be thousands, we don't know. So but the pressure is on from the country mayors that process happens very quickly. And at the Moree meeting, Daryl and I went to, I asked them that another letter go from the joint councils, as previously when Peter was chair, that so that the minister sees that with the Bruxner, there are 4 councils involved, so that it gives us more weight in the assessment to hand it back.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Councillor Peter, then
Was
Councillor
someone
Kim,
before me?
Councillor Tim.
I'll go last.
No, you can go, and then Councillor Kim, Councillor Tim, if Councillor Murphy wants some more.
Yeah. Just a couple of.
Oh, sorry, Greg. Sorry, if you can, Greg first.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I won't take long. As the previous speaker said, this document is an evolving document, and thanks very much for that. But can you please ensure that stuff that's in it last month doesn't fall off between the next month, because Workforce Development has lost a bit of section out of it. In support of the Volunteer Expo, Rotary Rollins might like to take up things I think we should approach them. Council hasn't got the ability or the staff to run that. We can participate, and I know 2 organisations I'm involved with would be happy to take up some space.
Thank you very much. Noted. Councillor Kim, Councillor Peter, Councillor Tim, and Councillor Peterman.
Keep them going first.
We're going to go in order.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I had quite a few things on one particular section. I was a business proprietor down in the School of Arts building for quite some time, and I was perhaps a little bit disappointed to read from page 171 on that relates to the School of Arts. I realise that we've got a lot of new staff in that area, but there certainly is some information missing out. So there is an industry-based catalogue system down there called Past Perfect. I think on page 72, it suggests that we aren't cataloguing things and aren't doing things properly. All of the equipment down in that building is tagged and tested regularly. So all equipment that's working down there is pretty safe and reliable. So there's some suggestions there that there is needed upgrades to equipment. Perhaps the general service periods that happen in place twice a year may not have happened due to COVID. But I think that the staff, the new staff that are down there need to be aware that there are service programs and things available. Just very, very simple things that haven't perhaps been caught up. The other day I was spoken to by somebody from Mill Race who used to receive a weekly book program. This is now moved out to 3 weekly. The residents at Mill Race and Haddington are very, very keen and read a lot of books out of our library, and that service is very, very important to them. So I'd like to ask why it's moved from weekly to 3 weekly. And yeah, I just feel that perhaps there's some change over things that haven't happened in that section. Drake hasn't had a service since December, we were told at one of the meetings we went down to. And Torrington is in a very similar situation, but I think that's more based on the person that is doing the job and personal issues within her family. But it came out very strongly when we did those village visits. Thank you.
Thank you. Any response on the weekly program, down to 3 weekly for Mill Race, Haddington?
Through the mayor, I'll have to take that on notice. I know that the manager down there has said there's been some, there are some structural deficiencies in terms of process that she's working through, but I'm not aware of the actual minutiae of that, so I have to take on notice. And
thank you. We can also find out when those village library visits are going to resume. I know we had an issue permanently because of the requirement for COVID vaccinations, etc. And just to note too, the van that is now supposed to be doing the library books that's got the wrap on it, that there was some reaction to, was designed to also to let people, done through a library grant and designed so that people in the villages would know when the library was in town. So now, Councillor, is that all from you, Councillor Rhodes?
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Petty.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of comments and then a question. Hey, to do with the which I think is fantastic, through you, Madam Mayor, to our CEO and our library staff with their grant to the library that says to modernise the library, just without delving into the nuts and bolts, but what way are we going to modernise it? You can come back when I finish if you want. Yeah. And the other in your travels, Mr. CEO, I really commend you on sharing with this council that we're not alone with our financial challenges that we face, and the comments to do with Armidale and obviously Coffs Harbour, which really hit home. They're much bigger councils than here, and so I do commend you on that. To do with the on page 80, Madam Mayor and fellow councillors, just to do with the proposed, this mainly for clarity, concerns me. The proposed temporary helicopter landing site assessment has now been delayed. This is due to the New South Wales Ambulance 9 funding for Westpac Helicopter to conduct the test landing and takeoff at Tenterfield. New South Wales Ambulance engaging an aviation consultant. Every pro time has the timelines unknown at this stage. Can I have some clarity? But what's the issue? Or was that?
Yeah. So
that's West. It's to do with West's call.
He's advised that New South Wales Ambulance and Westpac Rescue Helicopter working together to come up and do an assessment of the 3 sites, I believe.
Yeah.
And then they got the go-ahead as to when Westpac could come and do it. And then New South Wales Ambulance said, oh, we no longer are going to, thanks but no thanks, we've now engaged an external consultant to oh, where's it here?
If you could.
If you could, please.
Sorry.
So but my question would be the same thing. Wouldn't you consult with the people who are actually going to be here leading the choppers?
Well, just a bit of clarity, that's all. If you could, please.
Yeah, sorry, apologies, I've just been obviously caught off guard.
You're right.
I will answer that.
Yep.
So this has been going around in circles
Yep,
for a number of
it has.
months, if not years, as you'll be.
That's right.
We nearly had Westpac come out and do a test flight, as in landing on the site that was established. What had happened subsequently from that, Westpac was unable to get funding. That funding was meant to come from New South Wales Ambulance Service. New South Wales Ambulance Service denied the funding. Sorry, just.
No, you're right.
Just run.
Take a breath. You're not
So
coffee.
what had happened from there was, it was then put back to New South Wales Health. New South Wales Health have now decided they're going to get an independent consultant to do the test flights.
How you going now, John?
Well, and help.
Sorry, I haven't been able
No,
to
you're
sort of formulate this correctly, but that's where it basically
No,
is.
that's
We've been dealing with Westpac, the flight manager, who's been dealing with New South Wales Health to get the test flight done for the nominated positions in Tenterfield. I know Drake is still an issue. Drake also, basically, Westpac had denied, I guess, warranting a helipad out there for subsequent reasons. We're still in the middle of obviously trying to work that out as well and formulate in writing those reasons behind denying wanting to push forward with that landing site. So our last discussion was with Anna Haggy from New South Wales Health, who is again back in the background trying to work out who is going to actually test these sites for us so that we can actually finally get this finalised and where it might be. We've nominated 3 independent sites, but we need the actual test flights done.
No, thanks, madam, and thanks, Wes. Sorry,
Yeah, sorry.
You're right.
There you go, I'll just listen.
Just a bit concerning, madam, and it's been, as Wes has touched on for some time now, that this council, or local government there, have tried really, really hard to be supportive of the villages in the town of Tenterfield, to update and maintain the landing pads that we've got, to provide the safety that the villages require. And we're only trying to do the right thing. And I'm sorry that it's ended up in a bit of a corner where it has. It shouldn't, because we're not that we're being dragged on kicking and screaming. Tenterfield, we're trying to lead the pack by doing the right thing and sorting out that every village, regardless of whether it was Mingula or Torrington or where it was, had a helicopter landing pad in our town itself. So that's where it was all coming from.
One would think it wasn't rocket science, but and disturbing that, you know, we're finally trying to what we thought was about to have these sites tested and a decision made. And suddenly the rug's being pulled out of that as well. So Wes is trying to chase up some more action in that place.
And just to finish, madam, I do apologise. I did lead with a question about the modernising of the library. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Senior.
Through the Mayor, thanks, Councillor, for that question. Basically, what we're trying to do is, you're right, modernise, contemporise the library. So that'll be spent on, that money will be spent on bringing it up to the, I guess, the modern standard. Libraries today aren't just about books, they're actually social centres. They're also about assisting people with other issues, school leavers in writing resumes, visual arts and all sorts of activities. And so the plan is that this money, as was applied for specifically, would be for that purpose, to actually bring that library up into a contemporary style. So it doesn't mean bookshelves and furniture and display units, etc., etc.
I was just going a long way through you, Madam Mayor, Mr. CEO, that you know, with the great support of this council, with our what I refer to as our village libraries, I was just wondering if any of that money could be spent somehow there in a little way. And they're not after much, but the main thing that we offer those in Torrington Urban Building, I think, right, that those that there, but obviously it's for that in that building itself.
But they may end up with the offer of some shelving.
Councillor Brett.
Well, I mean, that's a suggestion, is that shelving that comes out could be offered to the village halls if councillors think that is a worthwhile.
Good. Happy days.
Councillor Tim.
Thank you. Turning to the mayor on the issue. It's green for some reason.
You're more.
Do I have to talk in a really boisterous manner when I use yours? It's more a question for Darryl, or more a statement. Loosely based around page 160, it speaks about the Bruxton Highway, which is really no different to my concern with Mount Lindsay. I do understand that this document is fluid and it's designed to be changed. But I'd like to look at the ongoing budget efforts for local roads. I do commend Darryl, Fiona, Roy and Jess for dealing with me with questions about these matters. But the budget concerns that we're experiencing is not helping the repair of our roads. We've got roads that are having severe pothole damage. I know I've banged on enough about this in the past, but a lot of them are very, very unsafe. And I find it strange that we're spending money on things prior to at least returning our roads to a safe condition. So all I'm suggesting in this document that staff considers at the highest possible level that at least our roads come to a safe condition. I'm not even talking about repairing, widening, bituminizing, but if you're not ready for some of these potholes on the mountains at the moment, you know, if you're an inexperienced driver, accidents are very, very, very likely. So that was my comment, and I'm happy to take it on notice if you wish. Yeah, look.
Can I just respond just quickly? I see it bounced. Through the Mayor, I may respond. The council, look, we certainly note your concerns and concur with them. It's not a case of that we aren't looking at options. So right now there's a real cost to some of these things, and even though Fiona's busy, to her credit, in the last couple of days I've asked her to start breaking down costs in terms of the real cost to council in going out and fix some of these potholes, or not just potholes. What did you call them, Fiona? There was the failures in the roads, and that there's a real cost. And to be quite frank, we don't have capacity. So when we move stuff around, there's a cost, or something else has to be let go. It's quite complex, but and it's not just here. Look, I don't want to keep using it as an excuse, but I just drove back through from Yamba on the weekend, and it's dangerous all the way along that Bruxton now, through here in Kyogle, down in the Clarence Valley. Some of those holes you can get lost in, and I saw cars swerving and all the rest of it. So we are looking at it, and as I said, Fiona's looking at real costings and looking at how we may shift priorities, and that will be a discussion we'll have to have with council in the very near future. I know it's not an answer, but it is an observation and information, so you can consider that. I'm not sure if Fiona would like to add anything to that. Yeah.
Give us an update though on roads in general, how it's going, so anything besides that. Besides that.
Have you got all day, mate?
Yeah, that's right. Through you, me. We had what we would call another significant rain event weekend before last, as we all know. We currently declared under the AGRN 1012 from February 28th or from February 24th onwards. I have actually put in an assessment form through Resilience New South Wales to have that last event either declared or 1012 extended. So we're still getting around there. We're basically refixing some of the work that we'd already refixed. Most of our repairs are temporary. That's all we can do at the moment to try to move on as quickly as we can. People might be seeing that and think that we're only doing a quick fix and it's not going to work and it's an emergency patch, and that's exactly what it is. It's too wet to do permanent repairs at the moment in a lot of areas. So very much it's on the run works at the moment, on the run repairs with the view to come back as soon as it's dry enough for us to actually do some permanent works. In terms of Mount Lindsay, we have redirected some growth recovery funding to do some heavy patching there in the next few weeks. That won't fix all of it, obviously. That's only going to fix a small section from probably Wilson's Downfall to Wiley Creek, and it'll be paid for failures and stabilisation of those. And that's the best we can do at the moment is stabilise, because that'll counteract some of the moisture, but it won't fix between the end of the construction works between Legume and Wollongong through New Korea, etc. That's probably a much larger scope project that we'll be looking for funding in the future.
No, thank you for that. It's just, I appreciate your efforts 100%. And my thoughts have been all along about priorities. You know, I think for a Shire to move forward, you know, it's all very nice to have, I realise it's a case and it's a mute point now with the post office, but I'd much rather have roads without potholes than a painted post office.
Can I just add there too, that in that recent event that Fiona's referred to, parts of the eastern section of the Shire had between 200 and 285 mils of rain in 2 days. So that's 11.5 inches in the scale. And a lot of the previous works in crossings have completely gone again, down to pipes, etc. And Fiona, one of our bridges had a 3-ton load limit put on it because it moved off its abutment as that sidetracks on it.
Happening as we speak.
Just for the mayor and the risk of being the voice of doom, and also it's not going to get any better. As of yesterday, the BOM has identified that the La Nina is now going to a 3rd year, so we've got another year of this as well. So that's really problematic for us, particularly considering the resources that we have.
Thank you. And just to remind people, I know people are calling up the road repairs everywhere, and Fiona's team, when they're in an area, are trying to get to those, but the priority is the hierarchy of roads, which is your through roads first. And but if there's something nearby that needs urgent repair, they're trying to get there. Councillor, was that the end of yours?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Peter Murphy, thanks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to the Chief Executive. Page 219, administration building refurbishment. Why is the actual to date already 45% over budget? And what is the forecast final cost for refurbishment?
Thank you for that question, Council. I'm going to have to refer that to Kyle Nickership as the numbers there. Thank you.
We added back into the budget this quarter, which you'll see the retention payment. So we have to wait for 12 months until the retention period has finished. So they've been added back in there. The other thing we've been trying to do is to capitalise where possible any other items that we've been purchasing so that they can actually go and assist some of our ratios, which is what we sort of talked about before. So if there have been things like IT, etc., that we've been able to capitalise, we've been looking into those accounts and obviously trying to offset them with the operational expenditure that we've had if they've been capital in nature.
Thank you. Next question on commercial works. I note that the actuals to date show commercial works yielded only 37,781. Are there not ways where council can increase its income from commercial works?
Which page?
What year, what page?
Sorry, 238. 238.
So, through you, Madam Mayor, the commercial works, of course, depends on the capacity and the levels of staff to undertake those commercial works. Even this week, we've had some requests to undertake some works that we would charge for, but we don't actually have the staff to send to charge out for those works at this point in time. For example, lawn mowing. So if our staff are fully employed, then we can't actually go and mow somebody else's lawn and charge them a commercial rate at this point in time.
Thank you.
No other questions? I had one, which I've now lost. So, there we go. Page 208. To May, I'm not sure the page, but was in relation to increase in subdivision applications in Tenterfield due to the impending cessation of the development stimulus package. I was just wondering, Kyle, if you could perhaps share with us how many increased applications we've seen in the last 2 months as a result of that, roughly.
Yeah, I might have to take that on notice. I know that there's 2 subdivisions that we've actually got for a considerable number of lots. And we have actually got some assistance at this point in time within that operational budget. to assess those to make sure that we meet those requirements of the applicants at this point. So in simple terms, Anthony is running around doing some of those extra jobs, just to make sure that we actually meet our obligations to assess those in the timeframe. Some of them too are coming in and people saying that they're about to lodge, et cetera, et cetera. So, but I can get you updated information from the portal and send that out, you know, as of a date today, but it's a bit of a moving feast at the minute.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for your questions. All in favour of receiving, oh, sorry.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, I just have one question on that, Kylie. It is my understanding that quite a lot of people that are putting in DAs are now finding that they're in fire graded areas. And as our moratorium finishes very, very shortly, they're not going to be able to get them through as DAs because of this fire mitigation thing. Perhaps May might be able to give us a little bit more information on that. And
May will be able to update you. I'm not dealing with the RFS, so since she's here.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, Councillor Rhodes. If the applications are lodged prior to the 30th of June, Council, under the legislation, must assess them against the policies and legislation in place at that time. So there's no rush for us to have RFS concurrence back by the 30th of June, so that they will still gain the benefit of the policy, of this economic stimulus policy, if they're lodged before the 30th of June.
Thanks very much, because some of those, those places are actually well inside the town limits, so still coming up as bushfires. Very good. All in favour to receive the report? Carried. Now we can have
Madam Mayor,
Spiko.
I'd like to vote no and have my vote no recorded.
Certainly, we can.
Just some clarity, Madam Mayor, what's Councillor Murphy, what are you voting no on?
On the operational report, I do not believe that council has done everything it should do to decrease, reduce expenditure payable by ratepayers and to increase own source revenue coming from other and ratepayers, particularly in respect of sale of assets and seeking co-funded grants.
If I may just remind all councillors that the officer's recommendation we are voting on page 139 is that council receives and notice the status of the monthly operational report, not whether they agree or disagree with what is contained there.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councillor Murphy, are you agreeable to receive and notice the status, even though you disagree with the content? Because that's what the actual vote is on, that council receives and notes the status of the monthly operational report for April 2022.
Frankly, Madam Mayor, to say that I agree with the receipt of the report, when I don't agree with the report, I think justifies me in continuing to say no.
What does it know?
That's fine. Okay, we have another item we could deal with and then have.
I'm hungry.
Or you're good right now. Very good.
I'll move that we suspend standing orders, Madam Mayor.
Very well, to suspend standing orders by councillor Hungry. So now there was a seconder, please, councillor Tom. All in favour? Thank you.
go along with Ratepayers Association.
Just waiting on that.
Wow.
About this one.
I think he's getting slow on that, man.
All this stuff is only just
Okay.
about justification.
Very well. Page 2, so someone to resume.
Yeah, happy to, Madam Mayor.
Thank you very much, everyone. Page 273, item GOV 42/22. This is called for expression of interest in the Tenterfield Heavy Vehicle Bypass Economic Enhancement Advisory Group.
Councillor Rhodes would like to say something, and I'll second it.
Madam Mayor, I would like to move that this be added to the confidential section of today's meeting due to people being in the room that we are going to be discussing.
Thank you. She asked that of Kylie before, and she said it is in the public realm, and therefore
There's certain rules, obviously, about what is confidential. Have you got the list of items on that are confidential in nature? We'll not be able to read them out. Councillors might be able to nominate the one which their motion relates to.
And just while that's happening, I would just also advise that A in the book is Chris Moon, not Tim Moon.
So if you can turn to councillors page number 1 of the confidential, your confidential papers, and just identify which item that relates to under there. That's the grounds. Well, they're not personnel, they're public individuals that are there. There is no hardship for my determination. I don't believe that it would confer a commercial advantage on a person. I don't think it would prejudice the maintenance of law, security of the council, concerning litigation, allegations of contravention of the code of conduct.
I think it's good where it is.
We did make that request before because it was dealing with people, but it doesn't meet the criteria. So moving forward,
I'm happy to withdraw that, Madam Mayor.
Thank you for raising that, Councillor. And if we can just make sure in the recommendation that A is Chris Moon, not Tim. So, all expression of interest in the Tenterfield Heavy Vehicle Bypass Economic Enhancement Advisory Group, or in other words, what we call the Bypass Strategy Group. And if I will call on
Happy to move, Madam Chair.
So mover, yes, Peter, and seconder, Councillor.
With the comment, yep.
Yes, certainly. And just for people's information, with the change in federal government, we are not 100% sure where that leaves us with the bypass, and whether in fact we do still therefore need a bypass strategy committee, and the timing did not allow for contracts to be signed. We're still waiting for the information session with Transport New South Wales, which interestingly said they wanted to defer until after the election. So, all righty, so, Kylie, if you could please.
Yeah, no problem, Madam Mayor. So the purpose of this report obviously was to appoint 2 community representatives from the expressions of interest received. Previously, council's resolved to constitute this particular committee. So there's been 2 representatives nominated from the Chamber of Commerce in accordance with the committee structure, those being Kirsten Lovett and Peter Hay. And from that, we actually received 3 expressions of interest from Chris Moon, Beate Summer and Peter Ford for inclusion on the committee. So the applications that have been made by those individuals are included in your papers, and as such, we're looking for somebody to move obviously around 2 to appoint 2 of those applicants as community representatives.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move that we approve the appointment of Chris Moon and Beate Summer.
Happy to second that.
Seconded by Councillor Petty. Any comments? Sorry, Jeff, did you still want to make a comment, or do we proceed with the vote?
The primary comment that I pick up and reading taking a sentence out of the report, and the group will provide an engagement forum for discussion with the community, in brackets, and feedback on development of desirable outcomes of the bypass. And so therefore, I think it's a bit of a moot question. We hope to have a good basis of people to engender comment from the community. So this is about more the committee rather than, or the committee, and we have the right content.
Very much. So, now for the comment,
I do, if I may. Being the mover to the officer's recommendation, and the second to Councillor Murphy's motion to identify the other 2 interested parties. Madam Mayor, just with the off the record, but it needs to be noted here, it is some concern. This bypass is a conversation, I won't say an argument, but debate that's over 60-year-old in this community. Yeah, here we are, and we have had a change of government last weekend. So I would ask you as our mayor to in his role as Minister for what was he, Infrastructure and Finance or whatever he was, to start the conversation with our federal member to make sure that that funding is there. It was supported by the state government. And correct me if I'm wrong, the figures that the feds are putting up 96 or 7 and
96 and 24.
Yeah, the state government put up the balance. So you'd hope the state government are good with theirs. They're not due for election till March. And I was under the belief that when our federal member Barnum Joyce announced that funding was bipartisan support. I don't know how it works, and it's probably a good point that yes, there is a change. We would hope that it's still supported, but I would ask you, Madam Mayor, to pursue that and make sure that that funding is there. What we're doing here is a very positive thing. I take on board me personally, as a council being elected in 2008, it was a debate then, being asked on the street whether I support the bypass. Of course I support the bypass, always have, always will continue to. So it's something that personally as a councillor and a member of an elected body that I would hope that this council still support, but I'd ask you as mayor to please contact our federal member and get him, because of his contacts, obviously now in opposition, to make sure that that funding is still there.
Thank you, and that clarification to ensure that that project's, whether it's still a go or whether it's now up for another decision.
Thank you.
So thank you. So we have had a proposal from Councillor Murphy that the 2 community representatives, A, Chris Moon, and B, Beate Summer, and I'll put that to the vote. All in favour? Carried. So the amendment becomes the motion, which will then read appoints 2 community representatives, should be representatives, from the expression of interest received, A, Chris Moon, B, Beate Summer. All in favour? Carried. And we thank Mr. Ford for his application. Okay.
page 283, item GOV 43/22. This is dealing with the adoption of the IPNR documents, including the community strategic plan, asset management strategy, workforce management strategy, delivery program, community engagement strategy, and long-term financial planning. If I may have a mover, please. Councillor Kim, seconder. Councillor Peter Petty. And we welcome Elise on to the, thank you, Lee.
Thank you. The purpose of this report is for council to adopt the draft integrated planning and reporting documents for Tenterfield Shire Council, including Community Strategic Plan 2022 to 2032, Asset Management Strategy 2022 to 2032, Workforce Management Strategy 2022 to 2032, and Long-Term Financial Plan 2022 to 2032.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Sutton.
Okay, first thing, how can we adopt a long-term financial plan when I don't even know what it is?
Roy might be able to help us with this plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy.
Councillors, Madam Mayor. Thanks for the question, Councillor. So the long-term financial plan has to follow a process which is called within the resourcing strategy of the integrated planning and reporting framework, which is a mandatory requirement by the government towards councils. For council to present an IPR document without the long-term financial plan would be in breach of the resourcing strategy, which is a requirement of the government. The long-term financial plan is a working document, and it is not a fixed thing, and it will be subject to change depending on whatever happens with the future SRVs or any income and expenditure reductions during the course of our operations.
Just on that, if I also may confirm, with the long-term financial plan, there were various models in there. What we are dealing with for the next financial year is no special rate variation. We are not making any decision today on applying for a special rate variation, or commonly called rate rise. That will happen in the next few months. We need to make that decision of if we proceed with a special rate variation application to IPART, if so, of what percentage and over what time frame. And as Roy has said, these numbers become fluid if, as per what Councillor Murphy was talking before about any asset sale or any other change in operations, etc. So if you look in your financial planning, scenario-based, no SRV, that is what we're dealing with, because we made that decision in February to not proceed with applying for a special rate variation for this coming financial year. And we made the decision in February that we would look at that for next financial year, which is 23-24. So that is the process we've been out dealing with in the community, and we will need to make such a decision by July, August at the latest. And that will involve, so for everyone's knowledge, should council decide that we will be applying for a special rate variation of X% over X many years, that goes back out to the community before it goes off to IPART. Can I be very, very clear with that? Because there is so much misinformation being spread through the community. It is quite disturbing that some people simply do not wish to listen to the truth. So, very clear, this coming year, the only change to the rates in the rates and charges notice is the first two lines, which is to cover the 0.7% that IPART granted in the rate peg. And that is across the entire Shire yield.
So less than 1%. The remainder of the rates and charges bill is what we are dealing with today, as we do every single year, where we have presented to us proposed a list of fees and charges, some of which you will see have a 0% change, some actually have a negative change, and others have an increase. Most are in that 5%. There is in the water department, there is a 15.79% charge. And also reminding people that water, waste and sewer funds are standalone restricted funds and cannot be, monies raised in those areas are used within those areas and are not transferred across to the general fund. So just to be very, very clear on this issue. So we are not today dealing with any decision on special rate variations, applications, percentages or timeframes. We are dealing with the engagement strategies, community strategic plan, the asset and workforce management strategies, the long-term financial plan, which, as Roy said, is a fluid document but is required by for the IPNR process and also for the Office of Local Government, and our delivery program for the next 4 years based on the models. So thank you, Councillor Jeff.
Being a new councillor, I just was putting this up for clarification, that my understanding is that this is a state government-based directive and structure to meet requirements, and as such, that has to go forward on that basis.
Councillor, we have an integrated planning and reporting framework that all of these documents must be done under regulation, under their guidelines. They are done out to 10 years, but every council that comes in, they are then reviewed and looked at again for the next 10 years going forward. They are a living document, other than the budgets that we need to be talking about today for 22-23. That are no SRV, just the rate peg. Other than that, they will be fluid as council make decisions going forward.
I believe in, sorry, just following on from that comment, like there appears in the community a confusion on what this government-based document is, as opposed to, for example, developing a project-based or a specific group of planning. Like this goes out 10 years and it's got to be done, but obviously in 5 years' time, this world's going to be a totally different world.
Yes.
So I think the community is some parts confusing. Yes, we do need to have a more short-term, specific, goal-driven type structure.
Sorry, I think the thing to be really aware of, though, councils, is we're planning for long-term assets, and those assets are very, very expensive. And the long-term financial plan clearly articulates, or the first year of that long-term financial plan is what's contained in the operational plan, which is in the next report. But we do, under that IPR framework, have a responsibility through the asset management strategy, which is where this is driven from, to account for the costs of maintenance and renewal of those assets moving forward. And that's what that long-term financial plan focuses on and tries to give you the true picture. That scenario, the first scenario in the long-term financial plan, of which we've used year one for the operational plan in the next report, clearly shows that there is a significant deficit that council needs to address, either by divesting of assets, changing their service level, or increasing their income, probably a combination of all three. And that's part of what we've been having the discussion in and around the IPR process as to what that appropriate mix looks like to meet the needs and the expectations of the community. So and I suppose my only point with that is the long-term financial plan is based on the factual data and the projections from the asset management strategy. And so it's very, very important we understand that and that we make those changes to the asset management strategy or the service delivery of council. And the service delivery, just changing that, will not actually address the long-term asset forecast or financial forecast that we've actually got in there. So that's that next part of the conversation about how we do that. So year one of the LTFP and the long-term financial plan at this point in time is a sound projection of where we believe we'll be with our current asset base.
Madam Mayor, can I have two questions, please? If councillors approve the officer's recommendation, does that mean we're approving council borrowing $3,100,000 in the fiscal year 2023 and also approving the fiscal 22-23 deficit budget?
We are approving the long-term financial plan that projection is based on. The operational plan, which is the next report, is where you will specifically approve those items.
The second question, or it was a one sentence, but the two questions.
Okay, then I'd like Madam Mayor to refer councillors to page 294, where, amongst all of the detail on increasing fees and charges, there's line or paragraph 20 that simply says council borrows $3,100,000 in 2022-2023 infrastructure projects. I'm not in agreement with that.
Sorry, council, we'll deal with that in the next section. That's a separate report. Thank you. So we're dealing with the, that starts on page 285. No, all good. Lee, I just would like to also say 285, we did add Bolivia and Sunnyside into the community consultations, and that was greatly appreciated and well attended. So I hope for future community consultations of any shape, size or form that those two halls be continued to be added in.
I'm currently collating all the information from the second round of community consultations. What I found was in the first round, because at that stage we were not discussing an SRV, it hadn't been adopted for discussion by council. So we focused on in that first round of what communities would like to see. The second round of community consultations, because the SRV had the conversation around that had been adopted, I found that most of the conversation was around SRV in that second round of community consultations. Therefore, a lot of the work that we did around the community strategic plan was based on those first conversations with the communities about what they would like in their villages and in town. Because I will bring to council the collated versions of the second round when they're done. We've just had a bit of a capacity problem at the moment with staffing.
Thank you, but the communities were very grateful, particularly I have to say Bolivia, who requested it because they had been unable to get to Torrington or Tenterfield, and as we could see from that, the attendance there, it's quite a large catchment area. Councillor Bonner.
I just wanted to bring to more be on record for the community. In a recent conference, Councillor Kim Rhodes and I attended during the week. We had a discussion, I certainly did, with the New South Wales LGA president, and we discussed, I was going to mention, colleague, the three methods that we're working on to increase funding. I think we should include the fourth being lobbying to the New South Wales LGA for continued funding. The research I've done on the matter really says that Commonwealth tax revenue funds council's general fund pretty much, including grants and general works. Under before the Fraser government was around 4% of Commonwealth tax revenue. Fraser reduced it to 2%. Hawke reduced it to 1%, and it's now sitting at 0.4 of 1% of Commonwealth tax revenue for council funding. My suggestion was to, I forget her name actually, I do apologise, the president, New South Wales president, to her was that we shouldn't, there's a move afoot to try and get it back to at least 1% for general fund instead of grants, because I think it's around about 1% now, including all our capital works grants. But of course, we can't choose where to spend that money. If we get money for a grant to make it up to the 1% of CTR, we can't choose where the money is spent. So we're trying to get, as the LGA is trying to do, to get that up to 1% for general fund. On the report that we're getting 0.4, even getting something like 0.6 or 0.7% now would have a great deal of difference in our council running. And I suggest that going for, from their point of view, we need to canvass this body. That's what I'm trying to get at, is once we get a 0.1 increase, even just that alone will alleviate a lot of our rate concerns. So it's worth fighting for.
Thank you, Councillor Bonner, and also the outgoing treasurer of the New South Wales Local Government Association, Jerome from Ryde, who's a deputy of Ryde in the past. He has now just been voted into Parliament as a Labor member. So I can assure you that at least two of the councillors who are on the Local Government Association executive are making a beeline to him for that very reason, to get him to push to fix those FAG.
He also has a connection to Tenterfield.
He certainly does. And yes, so that's definitely one of the issues, as well as obviously the other lobbying. We need ongoing lobbying regarding Crown Lands paying rates, return of the roads, and some other, the ability of small councils to co-fund, et cetera, et cetera. So there's about 6 things there on the lobbying list to try and improve things. So anyway, thank you. Any more questions regarding the acceptance of these documents for the IPNR process? I'll put it to the vote. Thank you. All in favour? Against? Councillor Secon. Thank you. So now page 288. Item GOB 44/22, operational plan 2022-23, including statement of revenue policy. A mover and seconder, please. Councillor Gregg, seconded by Councillor Peter Petty. Okay. That is one. Penny. Thank you. Thank you, Roy.
The purpose of this report is for council to adopt the Tenterfield Shire Council Operational Plan 2022-2023, following the completion of the public exhibition period, which took place from 25 March 2022 to 2nd of May 2022, and for the operational plan 2022-23 to be included within the current Tenterfield Shire Council Delivery Program 2022 to 2026.
Questions? Peter, this is where you may now make your. We'll start with you.
Thank you very much. Page 294, paragraph 20, simply states that council borrows $3,100,000 in 2022-2033 for infrastructure projects. I am very much against that. 3 reasons. One is it further increases significantly council debt. Secondly, it would mean that council would have very little net borrowing capacity if that loan goes ahead. And thirdly, as I've highlighted, there's other ways to fund infrastructure projects, and we should pursue those before just increasing debt. The second point I'd make, and I've made this in writing to all councillors as well as Darryl and Roy, is I do not agree with the proposed deficit budget for 2022-2023 because it involves a very large deficit. We cannot keep on kicking corrective actions down the road by increasing our accumulated deficits and increasing our loans. The time has come for council to cut expenditure and to increase income that's not payable by ratepayers. And there's clear options to do so. And in the meantime, while we're pursuing those options, and I accept it takes time to pursue those options, we should not be incurring further debt through deficits and also through loans. Having said this, I would like to compliment all council staff on the excellent job that they're doing. Nothing that I'm saying is critical of the council staff, in particular the CEO. I'm very much confident in all of them. I just do not believe that council is approaching the future the way it should.
Yeah.
Sorry, I assume we continue on council, and I suppose going back to the budget. If councillor chooses to move a motion, and once again, they've had some commentary on that, if there is a motion to be moved, then the council can consider that. Other than that, take the comments on board, and the recommendations are still there to fund the existing budget.
I'd like to move a motion that
Point of order,
consider.
Madam Mayor, I flag an amendment.
Yes, correct. Councillor Sawyer. So we'll just go around the room a little bit first. Thanks, Councillor Murphy, but we won't lose your. Councillor Greg.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move an amendment to the officer's recommendation that we isolate item 20 as a standalone vote, and we deal with first items 1 to 22 with the exception of 20, because I have concerns about the loan. And I think that we need to vote on the budget first and the loan provision second, because I think you're clouding the whole issue if we deal with 20 inside 1 to 22.
Seconded by councillor.
It's
we can do that. You know, it comes in seriatim so that we can block the others. Perfectly acceptable. All in favour of isolating 20 and dealing with 1 to 22 with exception of 20 and then dealing with 20 separately. Favour? Carried.
Can I just put a point of order? Can you please include number 1? Number 1 is adopt the Tenterfield Shire operational plan 2022-23 is attached. That with that motion that was moved, that excludes the operational plan because you have to identify how that deficit would impact the operational plan. So if you're not going to, so the point is if council's not going to borrow that particular funding, the funding needs to be reduced in that whatever section to make up the $3.1 million.
Okay, so you mean go from 2 to 22?
That's
leaving
correct.
1 out.
Yep.
Right.
Sorry, just procedurally, once council's decided how they're going to fund that through the moving of the motions, then we can put that in.
Thank you. So we're going 2 to 22, excluding 1 and 20, which will be dealt with separately. So there'll be 3 items. Some further discussion. Councillor Jeff, did you have anything on my motion?
This is the.
Yeah. Sorry, Jeff, did you have your hand up to comment?
On the current one here, one of the questions I had was, given the positive nature of water and sewage fund, could we please have an overview of the need for an increase in fees and charges? More for clarification, that's in the same motion we're talking about now, isn't it?
Correct. So as per Gillian's advice at our last workshop, so I'm just finding the fees and charges. In sewer, Gillian, who's our manager of sewer and water waste, replaces a certain amount of distance of aged infrastructure, and it's a user pay fund. As I said, it's separated. The same with the waste and the same with the water. Now, water is the one that has the percentage increase, which is higher than the others, of 15%, 15 point, something like that. Anyway, around the 15%. And that, as Gillian explained, was because there's some unusual works required with the reservoirs to make them
operate correctly and compliant. And so that was with water. I'm not sure if you might have some additional thing because Gillian's off sick at the moment. So
To give just a little.
yes,
So with the water, sewer and waste funds, they are self-recovering funds. The funds that we generate from the income needs to support those asset management strategies. So all of the asset or the proposed works that we've actually got in there need to be funded by the users of those schemes. So the increase or the proposed increase is there to ensure that we have got the cash on hand essentially when those asset renewals fall due, and we've only looked at it over the 4 years. So that's how that rate of return that we need is generated, is by the asset plans and the proposed works within the budget at this particular point in time.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to move a further amendment that we only deal with 3 to 22 less 20, and we come back to 2 by itself and 20 by itself. I don't think we should be mixing up approval of rate increases in fees and charges with something as important as the budget for the next financial year.
Sorry, yeah, we might have missed out too in terms of the intent and purpose. The fees and charges, just going back so we understand, the fees and charges and the revenue statement of revenue policy is included in the budget. So any changes to any fee or charge will go back and alter the yield from your existing budget. So if there is such a proposal, then we'll need to make those amendments, if that makes sense.
Can we understand totally? I'm not proposing to make any amendment changes to the fees and charges. I'd like to see us vote on the fees and charges and then go back to the question of the budget and the loan separately.
Have a second.
So move to include
All in favour? The motion has failed, so it stands as 1 and 20 separate and the remainder in bulk. More questions to staff? Councillor Giano.
It's, I just think we need to have more workshops or meetings on the waste charge, because we've never looked at making people pay for exactly what they waste, because that might also reduce how much waste we're sending to the landfill, and that way people could actually pay for what they waste instead of I, who put out a bin once every 2 months, have to pay the same amount as someone who puts out a bin every week because they put their soft plastics in and they don't do any recycling. I think before we go on, we should have a look at, I understand there has to be rises, but I think we have to find other ways so that people can find a way to pay less if they have been good and saving on their water, on their waste. Well, sewage is a bit difficult, but I think we need to work more on that.
I think farmers would be very happy if it was only user pays, because none of them would be paying the, or very few would be paying the waste facility charge. I just think that it's certainly a worthwhile endeavour, but in the time, because we've got to have a budget for the 1st of July, so council can continue. We have to guarantee supply. But I do commend you in us investigating. And there's certain other things other councils and self have raised as changes to the fees for the future, but it's just we've got 1 month to deal with this. So I don't think we'll resolve those changes and factor them into budgets in 1 month. And it would actually have to go to public consultation if you introduce new fees or change fees.
Yeah, through the mayor also, we actually had contracted agreements as well that would have to be looked at, so they don't change on a whim, we'd have to renegotiate, look at service times, how many pickups. It's quite complex, so certainly well worth looking at, no problem with that. Certainly, but I would argue and respectfully suggest it's a discussion for another day.
And look, one thing I might add is council's had increased cost in waste because someone keeps wrapping up asbestos and putting in the recycling bin, for God's sake. And it then goes off to Lismore, to the recycling centre. They find it, condemn the entire load. So instead of paying something like $300 for a load, it then has to go to the landfill transfer, where we have to pay $900. And this has happened repeatedly. Something like 55 times. It went from 3, I think in the last thing, to 55. It is just extraordinary that someone has that money and has cost these ratepayers and council a lot of money by sheer stupidity. And I know they say you can't legislate for stupid, but that is stupid. And it's dangerous and it's costly. So, I mean, it's nice that they've wrapped it. That's nice that the workers aren't inhaling asbestos fibres, but it's quite extraordinary. So I do commend you, Councillor Secon. I think we can have a good hard look at the fees and charges, and I've had a look at some of the other councils as well, and I think there's some good things there. But as Kylie's advised previously, it's a work in progress and it does take some time, and we're just at the pointy end of the stick at the moment.
I apologise. Could I please, the amendment that's been moved by Councillor Sawyer, can I just have that read out again? That's what we're dealing with.
He wants to isolate item 20. So what we will do in voting on this, we will not vote on item 1, we will not vote on item 20. We will vote from 2 to 22, excluding those two items. Then we will vote on item 20, then we will go back to item 1, because item 1 is dependent on item 20. So we'll go in the bulk, then we'll go 20, then we will go item 1. So can I ask a question in following Councillor Sawyer and also Councillor Murphy's concern with the borrowings, proposed borrowings of $3.1 million, that figure changes, what therefore changes in the operating? Where does, what services then today, like say for instance, Councillor said, no, we want to change that to X amount, or in the operating budget, we would then have to decide today where to pull that money from.
Through the Mayor, that's correct. If you have a look at it, most of that, all that money is actually earmarked for infrastructure projects, and I'm going to assume it's mainly roads and transport. So what you're talking about is reducing the current roads and transport maintenance and replacement program.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, didn't we take out a loan last month for Bonnabanu and Road? So why do we need another 3 million?
It's for a different financial year.
It funds the budget. So the previous borrowings that we undertook was the end of the process for the current year and to fund those. So we've been working on the existing budget this year. We're talking about the forecast budget for next year. And so we have a budget deficit that we need to fund, of which we're proposing to fund through loan funding. So, the Mayor is quite correct. But if there is no loan funding for that, then we need to remove $3.1 million from the budget. Now, one of the concerns and part of why we've even proposed the borrowings is that we will have to go back and consider any other co-funded grants which may reduce further again the actual expenditure in that infrastructure space. And the quantum of the 3.1 million we're talking about is primarily infrastructure.
So, sorry, I know it's part of the next, another order that we've got to talk about, but so if we go ahead with this 3.1, then we still have spoken about the Chilaka 3 million that's due on the dam wall. So will we be asking for another one for that?
No, the 3 million isn't paid in one hit. It's a 20-year loan.
Yes, but we have to renegotiate it.
No. We make annual, as Jess explained at a previous meeting, we make annual payments. Perhaps Roy could try.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Any loan that we take for infrastructure assets will be a long-term loan. So even though the loan will be for 3.1, it would not necessarily mean that we have to repay the 3.1 in the short term, as in 1 year or 6 months. You will be making a number of installments over the period of 20 years, so depending on whatever the council agrees for the term of the loan to be. And that will obviously depend on the interest rates that we get offered. And similarly to the previous loans that we did, where we proposed a number of banks with their interest rates and the long-term period, and the council will make a decision as to which institution at which interest rate those loans are going to be taken. But it will not be a 1 year repayment.
Through the mayor, and just correct me if I'm wrong, Roy, I think it's also worth considering that even though it is a scary number, it is for infrastructure, and keeping in mind that's 3.1 million in today's value. So over the life of the loan, it's if you're borrowing the money now, it's a lot less over the life of the loan, if that makes any sense.
Yes, you're right, Darryl. That is correct. 3.1 in today's term will be much higher in the coming years. Also, the way the current economy is going with the increase in interest rates, we were quite lucky to get the interest rate that we did for the previous loan that the council sanctioned. We might not be able to see the same interest rates and seeing the way the economy is going.
As most councillors would be, I'm dead against borrowing another 3.1 million, but I also don't want to be held over a barrel when it comes to roads and infrastructure. I would prefer to see this particular issue of 1 and 20 held over for a workshop where we can look at the options with a bit more time than right now.
May I ask if that's possible in the timeframe?
So through you, Madam Mayor, if the council moves that way, the challenge we have is, as we said before, that we are running at reduced staffing levels, and the issue is going to be staff capacity to get those budgets up and running before 1 July. So at this point in time, we're going into an audit, essentially with staff, and that's what they'll be primarily focused on the next month, or we've got scheduled for their works for the next month. And then obviously the June 30 rollover and then the audit. So our time frame is a little bit stretched. So that's where, because we've got less staff, we're trying to save money there, we've got less capacity to try and respond to that.
So but then you're asking us to rush, no, I shouldn't say you're asking, you're indicating that we need to rush this through, and it's a pretty major decision. You know, I think we need definitely to give this more time, and if it costs council a little bit of time for half a day of workshopping, I think we might get a correct result that the councillors can agree on.
We would need, I think, to have an extraordinary meeting, because you couldn't leave the decision till the end of June for staff then to do the budget for the 1st of July. So you'd have to have a workshop followed by fairly quickly an extraordinary meeting.
Yeah, through the mayor, look, we are pressed for time. I'm not sure I agree it's been rushed. We've had discussion about this for a couple of months and multiple workshops in my recollection, but that's okay. I think I'm not sure if we can do it this way. Maybe you change the when the council borrows up to, and we do some further work on what you wish to cut. We do need to run a workshop in the very near future, probably the next 3 weeks, in terms of the SRB, and I guess it's all part of that. I don't know, that's getting pretty skinny though, isn't it? 3 weeks.
Well, can I ask, in terms of adopting this current budget, and we do need to complete the borrowing return for the Office of Local Government, and we need to demonstrate how we're going to fund the shortfall in the existing budget. Bear in mind that every quarter, council actually reviews its budget again in terms of those decisions. So by adopting this budget, even at the first quarterly budget review, you will have the opportunity, of course, to reduce the expenditure of the council based on the items that you've implemented moving forward. And so we talked a little bit before, the things that we took out, the Saturday mornings and things like that at the library are reflected as you make those decisions, and as council resolves to change service levels, then that will automatically be redirected or undertaken within the budget itself. Does that make sense? So as you change and resolve not to do things, then the budget automatically will be reduced.
So Kylie, can I just confirm, if as Darryl suggests, we change that to up to, And my understanding is if we did agree to that, it was like previous loans where they weren't actually enacted until they were required. If it was borrows up to for infrastructure projects, and meantime, in our deliberations and as referred to before by Councillor Murphy, we're talking about disposing of certain assets over time, but that does take time. The budget then, as you've just said, changes accordingly. Correct?
That is correct. From a legislative perspective, though, when we adopt the budget, we submit our borrowing proposal to the Minister or the Office of Local Government. So as at this particular point in time, this is what we would be adopting. Those other changes would come into effect over a period of time based on the decisions you make subsequently.
But this has to go up very shortly to the Minister for to meet the IPNR requirements.
So that we actually have a valid budget to start the year, we need that budget approved and obviously distributed to staff and managers so that they can actually plan those works for the year with some level of confidence.
Thank you very much.
Point of order, Madam Mayor.
Sorry.
You answered what I.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, but
Point of order, Madam Mayor. I deliberately excluded 20 from discussion during the fees and charges and the rest of the budget, so we wouldn't get cross-contaminated on it, and we've bloody done it. Can we please go back and deal with items 2 to 22 with the exception of 20 and get that dealt with, and then we'll come back and play with the weasel words on number 20, then we'll deal with 1.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor McNish, is your question to do with fees and charges or 20?
No, number 20.
No, we'll hold that one up. Now, so with fees and charges, just as an indication, including the higher percentage on water of 15%, that would add to a normal residential Tenterfield bill, $157.50 per year of water, waste transfer facility and sewer available. So the 3 availability charges, water would go up $81, waste I think was 11. Anyway, one of them was 11.50, one was 65. The total $157.50 or $3.03 per week. Just to put that in context, if you then add the collection fee, that would be $3.68 per week increase by adopting these fees and charges. I'm just wanting to put this into some context for people, if that helps in the decision making. So if there's no further questions, I'll put items 2 to 22. All in favour?
I would like an opportunity to speak, Madam.
You've got to be quick, Stephen. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, the fiscal 22-23 general fund deficit is a whopping $4,799,310, which I find completely unacceptable, particularly because council has only achieved expenditure savings of roughly 5%.
So which page are you on, Ted?
No, in the attachment.
That's in the attachments.
In the attachments.
It actually quantifies the general fund deficit, which I've confirmed with the chief executive is the case. A deficit of $4,799,310. That is something we cannot afford to incur. As I said, my understanding from the rest of the documents is council has only managed to achieve expenditure reductions of 5%. We had asked the chief executive to come up with expenditure savings of 10 and 15% and to explain the ramifications. But we're being asked now to approve a budget that does not include savings more than 5%. I find that completely unacceptable.
That relates to item 1.
Sorry, Peter, do you want to have this discussion when we come back to item 1, which is operation payments? That is where Darryl had identified items to achieve those particular savings.
Well, actually, no, because we've been asked to approve the council budget for 22-23, and I've just told you what the council budget for 22-23 says will be the deficit.
we're approving
Number two.
the fees and charges, which funded number 2 does include the Shire Council budget for 2022-23. It does. The options
So that
Darryl
part-
had identified to take it in the short term, up to the 10 and 15%, were some quite severe reductions that were costly to implement. If we're discussing staff cuts, etc., which would add to the actual budget deficit because of legislative requirements, and other items of savings, which was disposal of assets, which cannot be done in 4 weeks. Perhaps now-
Through the mayor, I just want to remind council, I did put up a proposal that identified 15% savings across the board. It was $1.4 million in savings, but that was in the second year. In the first year was, as I recall, $420,000 in saving. At the time, you may recall council didn't have an appetite for those cuts. And we can do more of that, but that's the first step. The second step would be doubling up on that. So it has been tabled, and it is in the MOR that has been tabled. And I think that's discussion that needs to go forward as a workshop in the next couple of weeks, and it's really related to the SRB. It's not relevant, I don't think, to today. Today is just getting us, if I put it in simple terms, we've crossed the flooded Wood River, we're on the hill, we can park the car and wait for the flood to catch up to us, or we can keep moving and start to do the maintenance that we need to do as we go along. No one, there's any disillusionment that we do need to cut costs, and we also need to look at how we increase our own source revenue. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, just with the utmost respect, we've put an amended version of the officer's recommendation through Councillor Sawyer, moving with 1 and 20 out, correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Sawyer, which I thought we voted on, and then you've accepted a comment or why you voted against it, I don't know, with Councillor Murphy. So I just need some.
Yes. So I asked for the vote, and Peter Murphy put his hand up, which I thought was voting, but it turned out it was a question and accepted. So I will go back to the vote. So just to be very clear, we are voting on the fees and charges as in the document. We are also including the statement of revenue policy, the fees and charges, the council budget, which is 2. So it's A, B, and C. The 3, etc., the farmland, etc., that takes into account that 0.7% IPART rate peg. We will vote on that now, and then we will go to 20. So all in favour of 2 to 22. So carried. Those against?
Division on that, please.
Certainly, right. Highly, a division, seconder for a division.
I've only got one. Councillor Lynch.
So do you need a seconder?
He does need a seconder.
He needs a division, so you can record against, obviously without a.
Sorry, were you a seconder?
No.
But if you want a division, which is how everybody votes, then it's your seconder for that, and then that needs to be carried.
I second it.
I second, well, otherwise I'll second it.
So Councillor Murphy was first. So Councillor Mitchell.
So John.
All in favour?
One.
They're voting on the division.
Division, which
It's
is
been moved and
recording the
seconded.
names of who voted now.
So this is for the recording.
This is
of
of the
the
names
votes.
in the minutes of who voted.
I'll vote to get the names recorded.
Absolutely, that's what it is, we're just voting on who's. So all councillors have voted in favour of the recommendation, except for against councillors Secon and councillor Murphy.
Who voted against it?
Yeah, councillor Secon and councillor Murphy voted against.
Councillor Greg Sawyer is for. Councillor Kim Rhodes is for. Councillor Peter Petty is for. Councillor Bonner is for. Councillor Nye was for, Councillor John Ish was for, Councillor Secon was against. Councillor Tom Peters was for, and Councillor Peter Murphy was against.
Yes. And Councillor Bronco was for.
Sorry.
Mr. Mayor, thank you.
That's for the officer's recommendation, Madam Mayor, with 1 and 20 out.
Yes.
Got
it.
So now we move to item 20. And in accordance with Councillor, Councillor, would you like to speak to that?
Thanks, Madam Mayor, and taking on board the CEO's advice, even though I'm totally against a loan, I think with the timeframes we're limited to, I think adding in the word of up to 3.1 gives us the flexibility after a workshop to thrash it out and either wipe it out altogether or adopt a lower fee. Personally, I don't believe in taking out more loans to cover that sort of debt, but I think in the interest of having the flexibility to run with what our improved incomes may be moving forward, and the fact that we have the ability of quarterly budget reviews to adjust up or down as required, I'm happy to insert up to 3.1. But if the words up to are removed or not allowed to be part of it, I'll be voting against the loan.
Thank you. A seconder for the words insertions, Tim Bonner, up to 3.1 million.
Madam Mayor,
Certainly, Tom.
can I ask the question, please?
Right.
Thank you. Is this a variable loan or is it a fixed loan?
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's no, not loan at this point in time until council receives a report on drawing down the loan at the point in time when it's required to fund the cash flow.
So, but the question to Roy, what would you recommend if we did end up there?
There are provisions in council borrowing policy that provide that it needs to be fixed.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor McNish.
Thanks, Mrs. Mayor. I thought one of the main reasons for this application was the new cell at Bundaberg.
No, it was the previous last one.
That was the last one. Okay, I just wasn't sure of that, that's all.
Yeah. Yes.
Through the mayor, as I've already indicated, this is for infrastructure. It's not for operations. So it is pretty normal to borrow for infrastructure. Now, as I said, most of it, and Fiona might be able to qualify this, most of it is for road infrastructure. And there are some ramifications because I think it's in support of some grants where we have to co-contribute. So if we don't have the money to co-contribute, we'd also lose that grant funding as well. Is that correct, Fiona?
Sorry, I just didn't see.
Just looking at Roy, Roy's.
With the capital expenditure we looked at this morning.
Yeah. What page is that on, Roy?
21.
21 of the operational plan.
It would basically be needed to fund the transport capital program that's not grant funded. So the works that aren't funded by block grant and roads recovery, etc. So in that capital works program that's in the operational plan, which I think is roughly 2 million. And then it would also be needed to fund the plant replacement program, which was the last one. Plant replacement. So it's basically the amount of cash that is short to fund infrastructure. So again, if you don't have $3.1 million, you will need to cut it from somewhere because there won't be enough cash to do it.
Thanks very much, Jess. So that would mean you'd have to defer plant replacement or defer capital works projects. Does that include then if we sell something such as the Franner crane, which has been discussed, would that then come off this?
Well, that's already included in that budget.
Okay, so may I ask for councillors' benefits if we insert words up to, and we have a workshop which we're planning anyway in the very near future, and as a result of the workshop, should we identify then that number can come down, we can then have an either extraordinary meeting or put that into the end of the June meeting or not.
So this particular budget that we're adopting is, we need to show how we're going to fund that, and we've shown that through loan funding, of which we need to submit as we said to the Office of Local Government, if you get to the point where council doesn't require a loan and you've wound that back through your quarterly budget reviews, we won't be undertaking any borrowings. But we do need that as part of the budget, because our balanced budget at this point in time shows that loan funding the shortfall. If you make up the shortfall, so, and it might not be a workshop this month, it might be in the first 2 months of the year because you've sold something, then your budget deficit will reduce, your cash will increase, and you will not need to draw down on that loan, of which we wouldn't draw down unless we require it.
Hence my amendment.
Thank you. So for instance, if we actually got the $650,000, whatever the government owes us from 4 years ago, we'd take that off the loan amount.
Yep.
That's correct, or sale of an asset as well. And we come back to council for resolution to draw down the loan. It's not a fait accompli. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Madam Mayor, just for some clarity, once again, where we're at, and I say this with the utmost respect of meeting procedure where you are. So council, correct me if I'm wrong, any stage along here, Councillor McNish has moved an amendment which he has spoken to, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, councillor Sawyer moved the amendment.
Councillor Sawyer,
Item
sorry.
30, where
As
he's-
yet, with the 20 and 1 out, correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Sawyer, which he spoke to. I thought there would have been a second to speak to it
Yeah,
then. That was Councillor McGinnis.
Councillor Tim seconded it,
Councillor McGinnis.
and we're now discussing that item of whether we borrow up to, that's the
Well, the
current
reason I thought
discussion.
it was bandied around that there was going, that this then would be brought to a workshop to kick around, no? No.
No, we need a,
Yeah.
through the mail, we need a decision
Yeah.
today, but what we're trying to qualify is you're not locked into that decision. It just lets us get on with the job of running the organisation and delivering what we need to deliver. And when the time arises, it still comes back to council for deliberation and resolution before we draw that money down.
Thank you, and I was just, because I just thought we're just losing our way there from you, Madam Mayor, where we're going.
Yes, no, so it was coming back to what councillor Bonner had referred to before about having a workshop and seeing how that could be reduced, et cetera, and what it was all going to. But with the insertion of words up to and the clarification from Kylie that said loan would not proceed without a further recommendation from council, as in the same in the front of a new one.
Yep.
And so that's where we are at the moment, is that council borrows up to $3.1 million.
Yep.
In 22-23 for infrastructure projects, which Jess has clarified what that is. And but in the understanding that that loan would not be drawn down unless we required it, and that decision would be specifically come back to council, and in the knowledge that in the meantime, government pays us what they owe, or we dispose, for instance, of certain assets, then that number would be reduced or negated. That's where we're at anyway.
Thank you for the clarity, Madam Mayor.
So-
Thank you.
All in favour? Against? Councillor, you're in favour, Tom?
Yeah, I'm in
Yeah,
favour.
you're.
Well, pull it down, put it in names, no.
Against, councillor Swan and councillor Peter.
He is a division to make to the second round or only the first place?
Sorry?
You need a new division?
None has asked for a
Do you want a
division.
No, no, so.
So that is passed, 20 is passed. Now we move to part 1, which is that, once again, knowing that the operational plan, which is all the works for the next 12 months, that council adopts the Tenneco Shire Council operational plan as attached, which has now been agreed with the fees, with the IPART slight tinkering with the 0.7% rate pegging, and with the potential borrowing of up to 3.1 for infrastructure projects. Adopt the Tenneco Shire Council Operation Plan 2022-23 as attached. In favour? Against? 8 in favour, councillor Sapon and councillor Murphy against the adoption of the Tenneco Shire Council Operation
I
Plan.
think we need a division on that one.
And we'll have a division, please. Seconded by councillor Tim Bonner.
Councillor Bush moved. And you go around in favour, again, just to make sure that we've got.
So
it
in
right.
favour, we have councillor Sawyer, councillor Kim, councillor Peter, Petty, councillor Tim Bonner, councillor Bronwyn, councillor Jennifer, councillor John McNish, councillor Tom Peters, and against is councillor Colin Cansway. So you could copy and paste the first. Thank you very much. Thank you to Lee and Roy and Penny. Page 297, item GOV 45/22, quarterly budget review statement, March 2022. A mover and seconder here, please. I know you've got your brief, but you're moving your glasses.
Oh,
that is.
It's like the option, wasn't it?
Yes, seconder. Please. Deal with this item.
Yeah.
Councillor John McNish. Very good. Roy, I can share this with you. And Jess, sorry, and I say thank you. It's a very in-depth and informative. Just while Roy's getting ready there, you'll note that this is similar wording to what we had in October about no additional operating or capital expenditure outside the recommendations unless they're offset by other savings. So this comes back to what we've said before about our staff doing a cost benefit ratio and with grants, etc. When you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, councillors. The purpose of this report is to provide council with a quarterly budget review statement in accordance with regulation 203 of the Local Government General Regulation 2005. In layman's term, each year, councils across New South Wales have to conduct a quarterly budget review process. Once a budget has been adopted, and we're talking about this year's budget, or not last year, next year's one, we conduct our quarterly budget reviews at the month of September, December, and March. This report here is focusing on the March review, and it is looking at actuals, your income and expenditures, as at the end of March, and it is comparing it to the adopted December review budget that the council had done as part of the December budget review. I take that the report has been read. I just wanted to highlight a couple of key things. We are, since the adoption of the original budget and subsequent budget reviews in September and December, we are seeing an ongoing negative deficit that the council is dealing with. On page 299, in the March 2022 quarterly budget review, the net effect of changes made has resulted in a further increase to the deficit of 195,000. It resulted in a new projected net operating deficit of $2.9 million. The paragraph above that, starts off with in the December, the highlighted numbers in the bracket, the 2.7, that was the deficit as at the December budget review. And what we're saying is you've increased that deficit and it has now become 2.9. There is an attachment, A3 attachments into the report, which is right up to page 307. On page 2 of that attachment, let's go by that. On column 4, we have the recommended changes of the as at March review. Now, this is a process where the finance team sits with managers and directors going through each budget manager and seeing the changes that have happened, what is predicted, any unforeseen change due to weather events, any grants that we did not expect at the original budget or at the December budget but has come in, or any other expenditures which we did not predict at the start of our original budget process but has come during the quarter of December to March.
Can you also talk about the change as well Sorry, whilst that's important, sorry, Madam Mayor, can you just talk about the change as well now to the surplus, obviously growing capital grants contributions included, because I think that's really, really important, because what it shows is that the community or the council is getting more money to do more things, but it adds to your underlying deficit. So your return on investment for each dollar is growing, but of course that's costing you money in your underlying surplus as well.
Yep, and we'll come to that. There is on page 302. What we do see is that council is though the community see that a lot of capital work projects have been going on, and we look at page 304 where we have a reduction in capital expenses. The 3.1 million was originally meant to be funded by council, but then we did take a loan out of that, and that was a reduction in the report. However, due to the financial constraints, we also had to go and take away large chunks of money from especially infrastructure services. Those are in the reductions column or at top of page 3 or 4. One of the things I would like to point is that every time we do a reduction in a capital budget due to funding, it actually adds on to our backlog for maintenance and renewal. The asset management strategy and the long-term financial plan, which in turn starts over the operational plan for the year we are in, that every reduction that happens in our budgets for capital purposes, which are meant to be funded by general fund, then adds to the maintenance backlog of those assets and compromising in the service delivery of those assets. Back on page 299, we look at the operating performance ratio of council. I've highlighted that in the red, that it is a negative 10.05. The benchmark for that is meant to be greater than 0. So it does demonstrate that the council is not performing as per that financial ratio there is. This ratio is also very closely linked to the own source revenue of council. And as has been highlighted in the past, the council does need to consider options to increase our own source revenue through general income or a reduction in expenditure. The rest of the report, where I've made the comments by as a responsible accounting officer on 299, I did indicate that the projected financial position of council is unsatisfactory as at 30th of June, and unless something extraordinarily happens. But at this stage, the predicted is 30th June, we will be having an unsatisfactory financial position. Commentary through workshops that council does need to keep very vigilant on its expenditure, not to increase any expenditure sources unless we are actually having an income source to fund that expenditure. Our asset management is a work in progress, and we are trying to get it finalized. And what we have been advised is that once the asset management software does get finalized by the end of this year, we will be reviewing depreciation rates as well, the unit rate for depreciation of an asset class. It is important to know that with the conversations happening currently with the RFS assets being transferred into council books, that will again hit our depreciation expense and give us a much more negative deficit into the future if that thing does go ahead with the state forcing councils to take on RFS assets. There are conversations at the moment where a number of councils are in the process of writing to the Office of Local Government and as well as the New South Wales Audit Office to not have that and have some reasonable reasons for the RFS assets to be added onto council's book. And at this stage, we haven't got any good response for that. I have acknowledged that at the moment, our cash flow and treasury management is in a difficult position. We do try to manage our cash flow quite strictly. And when we say cash flow, it is not only about the money that gets reflected at each month that is at bank. But the number that is presented as a bank is the amount of cash that we have. It does not necessarily mean that that's the amount we can actually spend on our general operations freely. So there is a restricted and an unrestricted or an available cash component to it. And at the moment, when we go to the council report for April, we will see a $3.5 million unrestricted amount in there, but that is purely due to your FAGS grant. 75% of the financial assistance grant was paid in advance. Usually they pay it around end of May, June every year, but this time state decided to pay it in March, April. So even though it is unrestricted, it is committed for council operations. And I've mentioned that on page 300, that paragraph D and E, the current conversations we have happening right now in regards to special rate variation and how the New South Wales local government department calculates and formulates its rate pegging formula as well. So that is something to be aware of.
Councillor Gregg.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move an amendment to add in item D, please, that the issue of rate capping and pegging and cost shifting be raised again in appropriate forums, because rate pegging is one issue, rate capping is a bigger issue, and I think we need to cover off on both of those. And I'd like to commend Roy for all those recommendations set out in there, because they are the key areas we need to get on top of to resolve our problems. And the sooner we get on top of all that, the easier it'll be for everybody else. Thank you.
Second, Councillor Tim. And Councillor Tim.
Can I speak to somebody?
Yeah.
There's one danger with the rate pegging and rate capping being removed. Of course, it's still an impact for the rate payer. So my point of view on that, yes, it gives us a bit more freedom to charge rates for businesses coming to the Shire, but I think it's obvious that we do want to minimise the impact on the rate payer, and extra effort should be taken to increase the FAGS grant and lobby that where we can. But be sure that members of the gallery, when we say that we want to remove rate pegging, change rate pegging and remove rate capping, it gives us the opportunity to charge more for if we're lucky enough to get a large business come in, that we can charge them more. The rate capping system at the moment is very restrictive. So removing is still a good idea, but we have to be very conscious as a council to keep the impact on the rate payer low.
Absolutely. So I just need to have a vote on adding the words capping. So we read that the issue of rate capping and rate pegging and cost shifting be raised again in appropriate forums. All in favour? Carried. That becomes the so that sits there as part of the motion that we're still now talking about the whole thing.
I think Councillor Murphy. I do want to.
Madam Mayor, through you to Chief Executive. Sorry. Through you, Madam Mayor, to the Chief Executive. Whereas I fully support Roy's officer's recommendation, I draw the Chief Executive's attention to E. The plan be developed to increase operational income and further reduce operational expenditure as per previous discussions. I repeat previous discussions and comments in council reports. My main concern is that I do not believe that council has developed such a plan and has had many months to do so and hence we're in the financial situation we are in today.
Sorry, councillor, was there a question there? I understand your statement. I didn't understand what the question was. I apologise.
If you would like a question, why having failed to develop such a plan previously when you've had many months to do so?
Well, I'll take that question on board, councillor, but the problem is we have a very severe financial challenge, and unfortunately, to make money, you need to have money. So in terms of driving own source revenue or creating own source revenue, the normal levers that we would normally have, we do not have. So traditionally, and I do take on board what Councillor Tim has said, but the bottom line is normally you would actually bring in businesses, whether it's resorts or whatever, who would pay a higher rate, and that's where you generate a lot more to your income. In terms of commercial income, we do not have the leads to do it. We are very small. So council can't run a commercial business as efficiently as the private sector because we have legislation that we have to abide by, which means the whole process of decision-making slows down. You can't run a business in a commercial world where I've got to wait a month to 8 weeks to make a decision commercially because it has to come back to council. Yeah, and as the discussion you and I had, the only way to achieve that is you set up a separate entity to council, which historically I have done in the past, but you have to have money and you have to have size and you have to have scalability. We as a council don't have that. So our options of generating income through commercial activities are quite limited. But again, I will emphasise you need money to make money, and we don't have money.
Can I actually add, Councillor Murphy, that regarding further reduced operational expenditure, as per information provided previously, since coming on board, Daryl has already saved over $700,000 in staff costs. There's ongoing hold on some of those staff vacant positions. There are staff members who are working across different fields to become more flexible in that workforce, and there's other reductions in operational expenditure that we have been made aware of, and further investigation and action happening in that sphere. So it was, I think, a bit unfair to say that nothing has happened, because quite a lot has happened.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor, I didn't say nothing has happened. In fact, earlier I complimented the council staff, and in particular the chief executive, for the good work they have done. What I'm highlighting is council has failed to develop that plan which Rory has suggested was necessary in E, when they've had many months to do so. And for example, an asset disposal program could have been started a long time ago, so we wouldn't be in the situation today, because we would have the cash, which the chief executive says we don't have. So I don't accept that council has done everything it could have done to avoid the situation that we're in today.
So can I just add, sorry, further to that, for instance, with disposing of assets, there was an asset that came to us, I think, late last year, but due to the community feedback, they didn't want that block of land sold because it has a bushfire access through it. That's one of the things on the books, that particular land as a sale. We have spoken about disposing of what we all call bendels, the estate, the land next to the old Boral sawmill opposite the Saddlers, and Daryl has in fact spoken to other persons about moving that forward. That is part of the plan, etc. We have a list of some of the assets we have. One of the other issues was the sales, which Daryl went and spoke with the agents and producers about, and that will not be looked at for another 2 years, because that sales has been a very important economic contributor to this council, and works that are done out there actually funded by the producers, and the producers have said give us time because we are now starting to recover. And so the plan has in effect, parts of that asset disposal is already underway in discussions. So, sorry, I did have another question here. Oh, you're right.
No, I do. Okay.
Yes, I'll come to you and we can come back to you, Councillor.
Do you want to deal with that?
No, we'll steer it around, we keep coming back.
It's fine, Madam Mayor, I commend on with your comments just now. And I mean, we're all, as your council, elected council, we have many decisions to make to rectify the problems of this council. And with the many workshops we've had over the last few months involving the conversations of staffing, of assets we own, or whatever, we will, in the near future, need to make a decision. Our CEO has done an outstanding job, and all those ideas, better than ideas, or plans coming forward. And Councillor Murphy, I say this with respect, and I commend you on your comments, that what you've asked is a question right now. But we need to make a decision. We don't have workshops for no reason, just because we've got nothing to do for a couple of hours. Workshops should be some direction to our leaders, our CEO, our senior staff, to go there and bring a report back to council about something. Nothing's decided until it comes to a council meeting and voted on. That's what local government does. That's what we're good at. I'll leave that now. Can I get through you? No, it's not a debate. I'm not debating it, council. I'm just a comment. Can I?
Yes, sir.
To do with this report, Madam Mayor, to you, Fiona, and I want to commend you, but I'm amused to do with on page 303 with our there's been a number of capital expenditure budget reduction totaling 1.452550,000. But grant funded projects that have been completed under budget. How in God's name can we say this? But I'm agree so was under budget $1 million. Wow. Can you speak to that? Those amendments and it's under clarity, the Mount Lindsay and the Toowoomba vehicle, not worried about the 14 grand and 10 you soaked it up in the beer mats, you and I both know, as far as money, but what they were actually for, just clarity, that's all. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Through you, Madam Mayor. The Bunnamanoo Bridge, I guess when it was first estimated and first application submitted, is probably a very conservative estimate. And of course, when we went out to tender, we got some extremely good prices, all very comparable. But obviously, the contractor was able to come well under budget with that. We're restricted by what we can spend that on. We can't just go and spend it on the next 1.5 kilometres of Mount Lindsay Road, otherwise that would be quite fraudulent. The same with Emu Creek, that was sort of in the same era. It was a conservative estimate put on the application. Again, good prices by the contractor. We had one contractor that took on two particular projects. And the two stimulus, the federal stimulus project, well, yes, 14,000, I guess, is neither here nor there. We have completed the works. And yeah, I think it's a good thing when you go back to the funding bodies and show them, excuse me, that you can actually achieve these works within your grant budget amount. I think it looks very good going forward, that they can trust that you're not going to continue coming back to them with variations.
Was the one, if I may, Madam, the one that Toowoomba, was that from the turn off into town, that resealing the road, which is a great job, drove again the other night?
Sorry, are you talking the federal stimulus safety?
Well, it's a Toowoomba road, heavy vehicle access.
That was the fixing local roads. That was the section between Paddy's Flat North and town.
Yeah, that's a good job.
Yeah, yes.
Great job. And the Mount Lindsay budget?
The Mount Lindsay was federal stimulus to just this side of Bookie Creek, between Rugby Farm and Bookie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was that 2
supplementary thing.
Thanks, Fiona. And I remember I think that started, wasn't an end, right? Just you rarely see that. And I just wanted to explain how all that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Peter. I just wanted a supplementary question. Given that you've done so excellently well in coming under budget, you don't think perhaps Transport New South Wales might let us use that on other bridges, etc.?
Can I ask the question?
Well, I don't see why not.
I'm sure within these particular transport budgets, they've probably got other projects that are going over in some budgets, so they're probably wanting to put those or redirect those budgets to other projects.
It's still worth a question, sorry. Look, I just did want to actually ask Roy on page 301, with the disasters. Do we have anything yet for the disaster, the February, March 2022 disaster? I mean, it's got up there flooding immediate recovery works the 1.5 million on the top of page 302, but
Yes, ma'am.
look, I mean, we obviously had more works than that required of varying degrees, and that didn't that immediate recovery works that had some specific requirement guidelines.
Not this particular one, but the DRFA for the transport networks for category B, which is essential public assets, which is our roads. The 1.5 million was budgeted for us because they asked us very early what we thought that our estimate of damage would have been under AGRN 1012. And we predicted at that point in time, it was only the first few days that we thought we'd have at least $3 million worth. And that's where they gave us the 50% of funding upfront to assist in our cash flow. I'd have to.
Yes, so what I mean is that the works costs will be well over that. So we will still, that has to be factored in yet because it's still going to be valued.
Yes, so, and it's probably just, there's a bit of a grey area at the moment to that event that we received weekend before last as to whether they're going to extend that particular disaster declaration or create a new one, because our issue is that there's re-damage from last weekend's flooding on what was damaged in February. That's just a bit of a grey area, but I'll be sorting that out.
Thank you. And thank you, Roy, also providing that balance sheet of what the governments, state and federal, owe us. So for people's knowledge, we have to do progress payments. We then put a bill into the respective government, which are often then, and our staff are very good at getting that in by the end of the month. Sometimes it's approved by the end of the next month, but it might take years. It's normally several months to get it reimbursed, but we do have some that are nearly 12 months old, others that are 3 years old, of considerable amounts of money. And it's just, it's very helpful to have that monthly balance sheet, Lloyd. Thank you very much. Now, more questions in relation to, Peter, did you have a supplement? Did you have, you're right. Very good. Well, thank you very much. Now, with that amendment in place, which now forms the motion, all in favour? Carried. Thank you very much, Lloyd. Now we move to page 329, item GOB. Oh, this one. No, it's all right. Mine is pages, it's on over stuff. A little solid pages took over. Sorry, item GOB 46/22, finance and accounts period ended 30th of April 22. Thank you, Roy.
Happy to move. Do you want to move?
Yes, please. So, and the seconder, Councillor Gianna. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillors, the purpose of this report is to provide the local government regulation 2005, a report setting out details of all the money that council has invested under section 625 of the Act. The report is as at 30th April 2022. Just a very quickly. As at the end of April, council's cash at bank had in the general fund $25.3 million. And in our general trust, we had $382,000. The spreadsheet on page 318 looks at the restrictions, detailed analysis of the restrictions. And as I was saying earlier, that just because we have 31.7 million, which also includes the 6 million invested funds, it does not necessarily mean that we have a higher unrestricted fund balance. And the reason on page 319, we do have that 3.5, which is a heavy looking balance. It's predominantly due to the tax grant being put into our accounts to a value of 75%. Earlier the discussion was raised regarding the fees and charges, especially with the water fund. I'd just like to bring to the attention on page 318, the last 4 lines with the restricted funds. As you can see that the water fund had only 1.05 million in cash reserves, and that is one of the reasons we need to increase that value in order to fund the infrastructure associated with the water infrastructure across the Shire. Also, page 318, there were no concessions granted in regards to conceded water leakage concessions. As at end of April, regarding 603 certificates, there were a total of 26 applications for 603 certificates in April 22. In the calendar year to date, there have been 129 applications compared to 152 applications for the same period last year.
Any questions on the finance and accounts report? All in favour? Carried. Page 322. Item GOB 47/22, capital expenditure report as at the 30th of April 2022. A move in the second place. By Councillor Gianna, seconded by Councillor Jeff Knoll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to provide and know the capital expenditure as at 30th April 22. I believe that the attachment has been read. Any questions arising from that?
All in favour? Carried. Page 329. Item GOB 48/22, report on loan balances. A mover and a seconder here, please. Moved by Councillor Webb, second by Councillor Gianna.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is to inform councils of its loan balance as at 31st March 22. This report is presented every quarter, and that's why it is as at 31st March 22. My recommendation that the council notes the loan balance as at 31st March was 19.016 million, and as at the last review, which was in December, it was 13.358. The additions to that loan was through its council resolved in its meeting on 23rd March. The waste management, Bunbanu, developed stage 5, 3.3, and the transport network 2.604 for the transport infrastructure works. That has resulted in the increase of our loan from 13.3 to 19.016. On the topic of bridging finance, it is as it was discussed in the last council meeting. We have spoken to them. We have been given an okay, which is depend on council when we need the funds to draw down. And the only reason we are not doing that is because we were to do it today, we will still be charged an interest rate to that effect. So we have been given theoretical principle and approval of people down.
Just a comment on Roy with on page 330 to do with the last paragraph. Thank you for with the debt service ratio, which means everything to where we are today. I want to commend you and your staff for the slight improvement there. It's a brief statement and paragraph, but it's clear that staff are doing everything they can to make that better in our debt service ratio. So I really appreciate that and that information. So thank you.
All in favour? Carried. Thanks very much, Roy. Page 332, item RC 6/22, Parks, Gardens and Cultural Advisory Committee. Yes. Moved and seconded. Moved by Councillor King Rhodes, seconded by Councillor John McNish.
I'll just take the report as read. Obviously, the councillors there who might be able to answer any questions if people have them or turn from myself.
Yeah, Madam Mayor, thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, Cole, to do with the, with E on page 334, just to, the standard off, I know we'll talk about powder toilets at Legume and Earthenville. You've got an investigation taking place in the worst commitments need to be submit application for NM1 number. I apologise, what's that?
Meter number, NMI, National Meter Identifier, I think it is. So that's where we're up to with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
As soon as we've got that, because the issue we have on that section of our shire is the actual distribution, or whether that's coming from Queensland as well or New South Wales in terms of.
With the power supply.
Yes, that's correct.
It'll be a smart meter.
I have a question and comment on page 335, down on item E, just above number 6. Shade in the Western Car Park, there was within the group saying no trees because they wreck the pavement and take out parking places, but definitely investigate opportunities for grant funding for this, the shade covers, such as you see in shopping centres, etc. And in green there, meetings are now 6 monthly. We have had a combined meeting, which I did not understand when we agreed to combine the meetings, that also meant reducing it to 6 monthly. I think it should go back to quarterly as per all our other advisory groups. So what do we need to do?
The conversation we had about that, Madam Mayor, was that we still haven't done that this month, just a capacity issue, is to come back again with the committee register for new councillors appointed to have access to those committees, as well as to resolve any changes that you would like made to timings. Right. So that's the appropriate time to do that. I'm hoping to get that back to next month's meeting for a review again of that committee register.
Thank you. And to our new councillors, to Jeff and to Peter, to look at the committee structure, because we've got to add you to committees where other people have filled in meantime prior to your election. And then in one there about the trees that are now being pruned, Kim raised how some shops were unhappy because the trees are growing bigger than they were supposed to, and you can't see the facades. But we also at the same time have asked not to trim trees that you don't have to, where there's no shop, like in front of the parks or etc., where there's no actual shop. So that, and particularly when we've got a photographer coming in July to put us in the lifestyle magazine. Just to make sure that goes through to staff, not to trim where they don't have to.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if you could give us a list of where they are, because we are on our normal schedule of tree pruning, like just as that time.
No, they're pruning those Manchurian pears that they don't normally prune, because they just kept growing above and beyond what they're supposed to.
Yeah, so if there's a particular area that you would like us to leave until the end, we'll reconsider, please just let us know.
Any other questions? Yeah, Councillor John and Councillor Gianna.
If this is there. 4B, the discussion as the potential opportunity, etc. I spoke to Darryl yesterday about the front of that awful Telstra building down there, how it's never ever maintained. I was hoping that maybe we could write to council and write to the Telstra and get them to take, maybe council could take over the gardening duties. It's only a very small one. Darryl said they've got the funds, which is fair enough. So I'd like to move that we actually write to Telstra and ask them if they could tidy up the front, remove the cement bases of the two defunct public telephones, pull those half-dead trees out, just put the grass or a little bit of garden there. They might be able to employ some local to do it.
Thank you. If you would like to so move, is someone care to second? Councillor Greg.
Yep.
So that is at Hayley, so that's to write to Telstra requesting improvements to the front.
Tidy up.
There's a great big dangerous hole there too that maybe we could go down the workplace health and safety thing because it's a public pathway.
So untidiness and safety issues in relation to the area and current Telstra building on Rouse Street.
On the same topic, Mrs. Mayor, if I may, the post office in front of that awful extension, which is the paint's peeling off. What if we could write to the, I guess, the owner of the post office building we could just mow the lawn, replace those palings, and just do a little bit of general maintenance around the place. So it hasn't got that full on look about it. It just detracts from that whole area.
Well, if you like, I could make a physical visit to the post office rather than a.
Well, I'm
formal
happy,
letter,
I'm happy with that if you're prepared to do that.
and I'll give you feedback.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
So now all in favour of councillor Mitchell's motion regarding Telstra? Thank you, carried. Any further comments on the report? Councillor, oh, and Gianna's next, thank you.
Sorry, could someone tell me what the wall slouch hat is?
A
The wall
proposed fountain.
slouch hat,
A proposed fountain.
a proposed fountain.
That's correct. It has been on Parks and Gardens for about 6 or 7 years. It's
I'll say 8.
or 8. It's a design, once again, that has been looked at in terms of Brooksmith Park because of the Prince of Wales Cup, I believe, that was won by Mr. Brooksmith. And so that's been an ongoing conversation, of course, as per the minutes, that we've struggled to find funding for that, and we continue to try and seek a location and obviously a broader partnership about where we'd like that to happen. There's been discussions about here down at the Memorial Hall and whether or not the RSL can actually assist with funding of such a sculpture.
And the other thing, I don't see any mention of the skate park, because I thought at one point.
So it's now gone out to tender. Fiona can give us up to that.
To tender.
Other than, yeah, it has gone out to tender.
Okay, but so we don't know if there's going, because they haven't even looked at what you mentioned about the basketball court being moved into, is it Jubilee Park?
No, so as part of the tender, it's gone out saying these are must-haves, which is the pump track, the mountain bike training track, the skate park, and then it has nice-to-haves. So also in the must-haves was an Aboriginal yarning circle and native garden and some park furniture of some such. And then in the nice-to-haves was a list of other things, including the basketball court. So we're now waiting on design, concept and design to come back in as that tender. So whoever tenders for that will have the layout of the land with where they want to put the elements that they can put in for the budget that's been described. And we wait to see what happens. And then we as council will then get a recommendation from our officers, namely Fiona, as to various options that we will then have to make a choice.
So, sorry, that means that we will be less the basketball court.
No, we wait and see what the design concept is proposed first before we see what's happening.
Okay, but it hasn't been given precedence being put down the bottom.
Nothing's actually said you have to remove it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so at the moment, the must-haves for that legacy grant is the pump track, the training track, the skate park improvements, including a bowl, the the park furniture, and the Aboriginal yarning circle and native garden, and then there's a whole variety of other things, pathway lightings, etc. An amphitheatre, I think that's in the must, isn't it? It was to do with the lay of the land there. So with excavating, instead of having an ugly hole, to actually landscape that hole into a tier, so it becomes an actual amphitheatre for performances and saves the issue of having to rehabilitate a hole.
To provide them, sorry,
To
provide them somewhere to take their fill, which isn't offsite.
Yeah,
So
leave the fill on site.
Exactly.
Yes,
So
and
that's
create
what
another
this
purpose.
is. And it'll be the tenderer who demonstrates best value for money within the budget that we have and to give us the most of what the mandatory and desirable elements are. And to fulfil the grant, we've got to fulfil the grant, but it will be in terms of best value for money, and it will have to be within the budget.
No, and the only reason is because we still have one building on that block of land. So
Madam Mayor, can I, point of order, and I'm just about to a stage where you need to talk to this council. I'm not telling you job. When asking a question that needs to be distinct into the report, nowhere in this report, correct me if I'm wrong, we're doing parks and gardens. Am I dealing with the budget that's been allocated and has been in this business paper, gone to the made to do with what we're doing there, or now we're just about to talk about the band hall?
Sorry, councillor Secon has asked why that stuff isn't in this report, but it's because, just to help councillor Secon, that's where it is at the moment. The band hall and the block of land next to it are excluded from the plan because there's a native title claim over that block of land immediately adjacent to the band hall. So the plan design concept has gone out across the whole block, excluding those two items. So once we get the information back, it will then come into Parks and Gardens. So thank you. Any more comments?
I just wanted to remind councillors that on next Wednesday, the 1st, we have the opening of the parkway and all of the work that Sarah and the Make It team have done. I think it starts at 10 o'clock, is that correct?
11, no, it starts early at the horse and you meander up to the speaking poles, or at 11 o'clock, I think officially. But we'll make that.
Can we confirm that?
I know that lines are going about queue at
Yeah, and so at each of the elements of the walk, there'll be such as at the CWA thing, the cow and the dog. The CWA are going to be there with scones and what have you, and the Centennial Cottage, there's going to be some Centennial Cottage people there in costume. At the horticulture one, there's going to be some people there with plants, etc. So we'll get some information out, just confirming everything to everyone. So moving forward, all in favour? Yeah, we voted on the Chelsea.
Yeah, no, we're just.
Final, second last item RC7/22, page 336. Regarding audit risk and improvement committee to receive and note. Ask any questions?
Through you, Madam Mayor, happy to take any questions on the audit and risk committee item.
Happy to receive and note, all in favour? Now, last item, page 342. Oh, sorry, I didn't get a move to the second for that. So I moved to the second for the
Yeah,
Trust Committee. So Councillor Kim and Councillor Peter, Committee. 342, item RES 5/22, Council Resolution Register. I move to the second here, please. Councillor Gregg, second to Councillor Jeff Knight. The council notes the status of the council resolution register. Are there any questions? We're good. All in favour? Thank you very much. We will have to go into confidential. Thank you. It has been resolved that item GOB 49/22, correction of boundary realignment request between Tenterfield Shire Council and Glen Innes Severn Shire Council. Officer's recommendation that council receive and note the report as an amendment, resubmit the proposal to Minister for Local Government and the Governor to have the local government boundary realigned in accordance with this report. Council make application to the Minister for Local Government and the Governor to alter the boundaries of the Tenterfield and Glen Innes Severn Shire local government areas by transferring lots 21, 22, 59 and 60, DP 753289 having a combined area of 32.38 hectares from Glen Innes Severn Shire local government area to the Shire of Tenterfield local government area, and that if any costs are incurred that they be passed on to the applicant. That was passed. Then item GOB 50/22 also passed. Correction of request for a boundary realignment between Tenterfield Shire Council and Glen Innes Severn Shire Council. Officer's recommendation that council receive and note this report as an amendment, resubmit the proposal to Minister for Local Government and the Governor to have the local government boundary realigned in accordance with this report. Council make application to the Minister for Local Government and the Governor to alter the boundaries of the Tenterfield and Glen Innes Severn Shire local government areas by transferring part of lot 140 DP 751487, having an area of 40.47 hectares from Glen Innes Severn Shire local government area to the Shire of Tenterfield local government area, and that if any costs are incurred that they be passed on to the applicant. As I said, has been passed. Item ECO 8/22, response to a request for council to be appointed as Crown Land Manager of 45 Martin Street, Tenterfield, lot 702 DP 11257113. Officer's recommendation that council reject the request to be appointed as the Crown Land Manager of 89154, lot 702 DP 11257130 at 45 Martin Street, Tenterfield. Request Crown Lands to deal directly with Granite Borders Landcare regarding their future occupancy of the property and resolve to terminate any further subsidisation of Granite Borders Landcare occupancy costs associated with 45 Martin Street. That was passed. And finally, item ECO 9/22, professional services tendered RFT 03-21/22. Officer's recommendation that council accept all submitted tenders as a panel of preferred suppliers for the provision of professional services until the 31st of January 2024, and that was passed. Thank you very much. That concludes today's council meeting. Thank you all for attending. Meeting is now closed.
2:41.